Sometime last year, I spent an entire day and night stuck inside my house. A massive storm hit my city, forcing everyone indoors for nearly 24 hours. Streets and houses flooded, and the news reported strong winds shattering windows and ripping roofs apart. I was alone, passing the time on my phone, keeping up with the latest updates and listening to the chaos outside. Around 5 or 6 in the evening, the lights started flickering, going off for a few moments before coming back. About an hour later, the power shut off completely. I waited, expecting it to return, but after a while it was clear I'd be without electricity until the storm passed. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone for any updates, when a loud knock suddenly hit the front door. The noise startled me, not just because it was unexpected, but because no one should have been outside in that weather. I hesitated, unsure if I should even check. Maybe it was a neighbor needing help, or asking if my power was out too. It was still strange for anyone to be out there, but eventually I went to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Maybe I'd waited too long, but something about it didn't feel right. A sense of unease crept over me. I returned to the living room and cracked open a window, letting in what little light I could. With my phone's battery draining and no flashlight available, I just sat there staring into the dark. Then, out of nowhere, I swear I heard a voice. I turned sharply, looking toward the sound, but it was gone. I waited, listening. At first, I thought maybe the wind was playing tricks on me. Then, almost right on cue, I heard it again. A few short words, like someone talking nearby. I moved to another window, peering outside. It was impossible to see much in the rain and darkness. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard for just a second. In that brief moment, I saw someone. A figure stood not far from my house, unmoving. I couldn't tell what they were doing, only that they were there. The darkness swallowed them again just as quickly. Feeling uneasy, I shut the windows and decided to head upstairs. Even as I tried to put it out of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought of the knocking and the person standing outside. The storm raged on, and the night stretched on in silence. Hours passed with nothing happening, just the sound of wind and rain. Then, just when I had almost forgotten about it, I heard something from downstairs. A door opening. My body went rigid. I strained to listen, but the storm outside was too loud. If there were footsteps, I wouldn't have been able to hear them. I sat there, frozen, unable to do anything but wait. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called 911, knowing it would take time for help to arrive. From the moment I heard the door open to when the police finally showed up, more than 30 minutes had gone by. When they searched the house, they found only an open front door and wet footprints leading inside. No sign of anyone, no indication of what they were looking for. It was as if someone had come in, looked around for a minute, and left. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. This happened nearly 5 years ago, back when I was staying in a small one-bedroom apartment. Around that time, my parents purchased a house about an hour outside the city. It was a large countryside property with plenty of open land. Because of their work schedules and the complexity of relocating long distance, they had to arrange for their belongings to be moved in about a week before they could arrive. To help out, I agreed to stay at the house during that transition period and oversee everything. I arrived on a Saturday morning, met the movers, and let them unload everything inside. They finished by evening, leaving stacks of boxes in the corners of each room. The only thing properly set up was the couch, which I planned to use for the time being. Seeing the house filled with furniture made me realize just how massive the place really was. The rooms were incredibly spacious, and the long, empty hallways felt strange without anything set up yet. After having some leftovers I'd brought with me, I decided to check out the backyard. It featured a wide patio with a built-in fire pit and had various pieces of outdoor furniture scattered around. I grabbed a small lawn chair, placed it near the fire pit, and settled in. The night was breezy, especially being surrounded by open fields, but it was calm and quiet. I must have been outside for about an hour when something unusual happened. A man appeared in the distance. He was walking far out in the field. I glanced in the direction he had come from and saw nothing but empty land. Looking ahead, there was nothing but the same open space. I watched him continue on until the fog gradually concealed him. The entire time, I couldn't figure out where he had come from or where he was going. Several minutes passed as I sat there, thinking about the whole thing. Then, unexpectedly, he reappeared, this time heading back in the same direction he had come from. He was slightly closer now, enough that it felt unsettling. Not wanting to draw attention to myself, I decided to go inside. I stayed in for about an hour, mostly scrolling through my phone. But I also checked the windows a few times. There was nothing unusual outside anymore. Around 12:30, I grabbed a blanket from one of the boxes, tossed it over the couch, and settled in for the night in the middle of the living room. When I woke up, something felt wrong. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt uneasy. My eyes adjusted to the dimly lit room, with shadows cast from the stacked up boxes making it hard to see. Then, a sudden beam of light moved across the space. I squinted as it swept across the room before shifting away. A moment later, I saw another small glare moving outside the front window. Then, just as suddenly, it angled directly into the room, illuminating everything, including me. By the time I could properly see again, the light had disappeared, and nothing was visible through the window. I quickly grabbed my phone and moved closer, trying to see who had been out there, but whoever it was had already disappeared into the fog. I never found out who was outside or what they wanted, but my best guess is that someone saw the movers earlier and assumed the house was empty, maybe even planning to break in. Whatever the case, I think I was fortunate. If I hadn't woken up when I did, I might have found out the hard way what their true intentions were. It was just another typical Friday night. After finishing a long shift at work, I grabbed a quick microwave meal, sat down at my desk, and logged into a game with some friends. I had an energy drink, a few snacks, and was ready to stay up late, unwinding after the day. We played for a while, and I lost track of time. At some point, a knock at the door broke my focus. I told my friends to hang on, took off my headset, and stood up. As I turned, I noticed how dark the room had gotten. Outside, only the glow from my monitor lit up the space. It struck me as strange. No one should be knocking this late. Then, I noticed someone standing outside the window, staring in at me. A chill spread through my chest as I locked eyes with the figure. The man called out, asking me something, but I was too caught off guard to process his words. "What?" I asked, stepping closer to the window. He repeated himself, asking if I was someone named Jake or Jack, some name I didn't recognize. I shook my head no. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing past the front yard. Feeling uneasy, I quickly shut the blinds and sat back down, telling my friends what had just happened. At first, they didn't believe me, but as they heard the uncertainty in my voice, their tone shifted. They told me to check the doors and windows. I followed their advice, realizing I'd never actually locked the windows before. Once everything was secure, they assured me it was probably nothing, and we went back to playing. A couple of hours passed, and honestly, I had forgotten about it. I figured if something bad were going to happen, it would have been right away. But then, another knock came, this time louder, and from the front door. It made me tense up in my chair. I whispered to my friends about it. They told me to check who it was and call the cops if needed. Moving quietly, I made my way to the door and peered outside. It was him again, just standing there, waiting. Something felt even more off this time. He kept glancing to his right, as if looking at something or someone. My stomach turned as I slowly stepped back and reached for my phone. I whispered to the operator, explaining the situation. Another knock came as I returned to the door to check again. The man was still there, but then I noticed something else, a faint noise from the side of the house. I focused on the sound, following it with my eyes until I saw a shadow move near one of the windows. The glass shifted slightly, then dropped back down. Someone was trying to open it. They tried again, but the lock held. A long, tense minute passed. I stood frozen, listening as the dispatcher updated me on the officer's arrival. Then, a dull scraping sound came from outside near the window frame. I could see the wood shifting slightly. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do, when suddenly, quick footsteps moved from the front door to the side. Then, just as fast, both sets of footsteps ran off into the darkness. A moment later, flashing red and blue lights reflected off the walls. The officers arrived and searched the area, but there wasn't much they could do. I gave them a detailed description of one of the men, but it wasn't enough to track them down. It's been over a year since that night, and they've never come back. When I was 15, I lived with my mom, dad, 2 brothers, and my sister in a quiet town in North Carolina. I do miss living there, but there was one thing I never liked: the constant downpours. One Saturday night, the storm was particularly intense. The thunder rumbled so loudly that it shook the walls. My 2 brothers and I were stuck with nothing to do since my sister was at a friend's house. It was only 8 p.m., so we decided to pass the time by playing video games. We were playing this bizarre PS2 game where all the WWE wrestlers were driving cars and shooting at each other. I can't recall the name, but I remember the exact moment the power went out. I was about to defeat my brother in the game when suddenly everything went dark. At the same time, there was a strange pop from outside. We thought it was just a blown fuse. I called for my dad, who was already getting his rain jacket on, to check the fuse boxes. Our house had 2 fuse boxes. One on the outside of the house attached to a telephone pole, and another inside. My dad asked me to come outside and hold the flashlight while he checked the outdoor box. I stood there, holding the beam on the fuse box as he flicked through the switches. Nothing worked. He told me to stay put and keep trying the switches while he went inside to check the indoor fuse box. The rain was coming down hard, and I just wanted to go inside. As I stood there, holding the flashlight, I thought I heard something in the woods behind our house, like a large tree branch breaking. I turned the light toward the woods, and for a split second, I thought I saw a hand peek around the edge of a tree. As soon as the beam hit it, The hand vanished back behind the trunk. My heart raced, but I quickly shut the fuse box and rushed back to the house. When I found my dad, he was tinkering with the indoor fuse box in the hallway. I told him what I had seen, but he seemed dismissive, only half listening. He followed me outside to where I had seen the hand. I handed him the flashlight as he cautiously stepped into the woods. I stayed by the back door, waiting in the silence. After a while, he had moved so far into the woods that I couldn't see the beam anymore. Growing uneasy, I walked toward the woods, calling out for him. Suddenly, I heard footsteps nearby. I called his name, and to my surprise, he answered, but his voice came from a different direction. Panic set in as I realized I was hearing two sets of footsteps, one closer and one farther away. I ran toward his voice, and eventually I found him walking back toward the house, breathing heavily. I was able to tell him about the footsteps I had heard, but he just told me to go inside and lock the door. He'd continue searching. I went back in and joined my brothers and mom by the back door, waiting for him to return. We didn't expect what happened next. We heard someone trying to open the front door, which was locked. I went over to check, thinking it was my dad, but my mom stopped me. She looked through the peephole and then screamed. She pushed us all away from the door and told us to go upstairs. At that exact moment, my dad came in through the back door. I didn't see what happened next, but I heard him yelling at someone outside. When he came back inside, he said he had seen someone running into the woods. It seemed like the situation was over. But the next morning, we found the basement window had been shattered, and muddy footprints were scattered all over the carpet. The worst part was that some cash and a few valuable antiques had been stolen. But it wasn't just that. The muddy footprints continued up the stairs, but then they stopped. Our basement door had a heavy-duty lock, and I think it was that lock that kept the intruder from going further into the house. Who knows what could have happened if they'd made it upstairs. It's been a challenging few nights around here. It started with flood warnings. Then those were quickly replaced by thunderstorm watches. Before long, the warnings shifted again, this time to tornado alerts. The sirens blaring in the distance add a strange, surreal touch to this new nightly routine. What used to be something I looked forward to, those heavy thunderstorms, has taken on a new feeling. I remember how I used to enjoy a good storm. I'd settle in on the couch, pull an extra pillow and blanket around me, get comfortable, and just let nature put on its show. I'd watch as lightning lit up the sky, tearing through the clouds with a sudden brilliance, illuminating the houses, treetops, and the landscape around. The thunder would follow moments later, a deep rumble that shook the windows, sending a subtle but undeniable buzz through your body. It was always a reminder of how powerful nature can be, and for some reason that felt comforting in its own way. But tonight was different. The forecast had promised a late-night thunderstorm, so when I started to notice flashes of light around midnight, I figured it was just the storm rolling in earlier than expected. But I wasn't quite prepared for the strangeness that followed. I tried to finish watching an episode of Orange is the New Black, but the flashing kept distracting me, and before long, I decided I had to check it out. I pulled off my headphones, stood up, and made my way to the living room window. The flashes were unlike anything I'd seen in a while. No rumble of thunder to follow. No distant sound that usually accompanies lightning. The flashes were sharp and clear, but there was no follow-up noise. No warning. Normally, when lightning strikes close by, you'd expect the boom of thunder to hit not long after, but there was nothing. Just the brilliant, disorienting flashes. I was curious now, so I made my way to the kitchen window. It's large, with a wide view of the yard and the road outside. The moon was nowhere to be seen, and the entire world outside had that pitch-black feel, as though the darkness was swallowing up the world beyond the glass. It felt odd, unsettling, and for a moment the safety of the walls around me seemed less certain. Without the light, I had to move carefully, relying on memory to navigate through the house. I stepped into the kitchen, peered through the window, and waited for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. Everything outside was still, dark, and completely silent, save for those occasional flashes of light that continued to streak across the sky. I felt the familiar sense of unease slowly creep in, even though I knew I was safe inside. I told myself there was nothing to worry about, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I stood there, staring into the dark night, I glanced up and saw the stars. The sky was clear, no storm clouds, no thunder, no rain, nothing. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful again. But then, just as I was about to turn away from the window, the next flash hit, brighter than the rest. And that's when I saw it. Through the glass, I saw the outline of someone standing no more than 5 feet away, just outside the window. It wasn't the storm, or the lightning, or the sirens that made me freeze. It was the realization that, in the pitch blackness of the night, someone was standing there, so close, separated by nothing more than the thin glass of the window pane. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but all I could do was stand still, staring at the figure. I didn't even move. I couldn't. For the longest time, it felt like I was trapped between two realities: the safety of my home and the very real, very terrifying presence just outside. My heart raced and my mind went in 100 directions at once, trying to find a logical explanation for what I was seeing. But there was no way to make sense of it. There was someone there, outside, so close I could almost reach out and touch them through the glass. And in that moment, the night stopped being a storm. In 2018, I spent a weekend with my uncle at his remote farmhouse while my parents were busy with renovations on our new home. It was a Saturday night, and I had been there for 2 days. The weather was fierce, one of the most intense storms I had ever experienced. There were constant bursts of thunder and lightning, at least 3 times a minute. The storm felt like it was right on top of us. I've always found storms soothing when I'm inside, so I stayed up a little later than usual, watching TV and enjoying the atmosphere. Once the movie ended, I turned off the TV and tried to sleep. Just as I started to relax, a bright flash of lightning lit up the room, and I distinctly heard a loud metallic thud from outside. I brushed it off, not thinking much of it, but then, 20 seconds later, I heard it again. Another metallic sound, sharp and clear, just as the lightning flashed. It was so precise that it seemed to match the timing of the storm. Honestly, I didn't want to make it sound like a typical horror story, but my uncle had always been a bit of an oddball, and we were never really close. I wasn't comfortable waking him up over something like this, so I tried to ignore it. But after a third sound, I couldn't let it go. I had to find out what it was. I got out of bed and made my way over to the guest bedroom window. The rain was coming down heavily, and the water streaming down the glass made it almost impossible to see anything. Then, another flash of lightning revealed a brief view of the property. I still couldn't see much, but the sound of the metal hitting something was louder this time, and it seemed to come from the left side of the window, just out of my direct line of sight. I decided I couldn't just sit there anymore. I wasn't sure my uncle would approve of what I was about to do, but I needed to know what was going on. It would be a little messy, but I slid open the window to take a closer look. The moment the window opened, the wind from the storm rushed in and raindrops soaked me. I stuck my head out, squinting into the storm. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of light, I saw a figure crouching near the basement door. The person was dressed entirely in black, and their hand was raised as if they were striking something. I barely had time to react before the lightning faded, and everything went dark again. I quickly pulled my head back inside and locked the window, panic setting in. I was afraid they might have seen or heard me. I hurried back to bed, pretending to be asleep and facing away from the window. Another lightning strike lit up the room, but this time, the familiar metallic sound didn't follow. My stomach dropped as I realized the person had stopped whatever they were doing. I stayed frozen in bed, hoping they'd leave. After several more flashes of lightning, with no thudding sounds, I thought it might be safe to tell my uncle. I turned to face the window, only to find a figure standing right there looking in at me. I screamed as loud as I could and bolted for my uncle's room. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside, still in his pajamas with no shoes on. He searched the property, yelling out, but found nothing. The next morning, we examined the basement door lock. It was clear the door had been tampered with, and the lock was nearly broken. According to my uncle, a few more hits, and it would have given way completely. He was impressed I'd noticed it. I was relieved to leave that day, and I haven't heard anything about that kind of incident from my uncle since. We don't really stay in touch much, but I'm glad I stayed up that night to watch that movie. I may have prevented something much worse from happening. This happened when I was 17, making the drive from my hometown to my new university. I had packed up everything in my old, inexpensive SUV, everything from clothes to books, and was heading off for my first solo road trip. It also marked the first time I'd be away from my family for an extended period, so naturally, I was feeling a bit anxious. The journey was about 600 miles in total, so I planned to split it into 2 days of driving. The map said I'd reach my hotel around 11 p.m., but with potential delays from traffic, gas stops, and food breaks, I knew it would likely be later than that. By 7 p.m., the sun had set, and the roads were mostly empty. Every now and then, a car would pass me, their headlights disappearing into the distance. For most of the trip, though, I was on my own. The quiet and isolation made me feel incredibly drained, so around 10 p.m., I decided to stop at the next gas station before I made the final stretch. 10 minutes later, I pulled off the road and into a gas station. It was completely isolated. There were no nearby towns or signs of life, just the gas station, a few pumps, and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any cars in the lot, and the only lights came from the station itself. After filling up, I was startled when a man appeared out of nowhere. He looked much older than me, probably in his 50s, and his disheveled appearance suggested he had been living rough. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It made me feel uneasy. "Do you need something?" I asked, hoping he wouldn't come any closer. He stopped a few feet away, glancing around cautiously before he said, "Take the exit back onto the highway." I was confused and didn't quite understand. He pointed behind me at the exit I had just passed and repeated, "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a brief pause, I just nodded, even though it didn't make sense. The exit he wanted me to take was a one-way road, so if I followed his instructions, I'd be driving on the wrong side and have to make a U-turn. It didn't add up. I looked at the ramp I was supposed to take. Seemed completely clear, no signs of construction or anything blocking it. As I finished up, I glanced back at the man, who was now sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, the stranger the whole situation seemed. I began to wonder if this was some kind of trap. Trusting my instincts, I decided to leave the gas station, heading toward the entrance to the highway. But as I merged onto the highway, I noticed something strange. Most of the streetlights were out. I slowed down, assuming it was some sort of construction zone. But as I focused on the road ahead, something caught my eye. Just a vague shape to my left. Suddenly, a pickup truck appeared out of nowhere and stopped right in front of me. The doors swung open, and 4 men jumped out, brandishing various weapons, metal bats, machetes, and knives. They weren't even trying to hide their faces, and they had this cold, emotionless look on their faces, like they didn't care about what they were doing. I quickly put my car in reverse, backing up as fast as I could, but just as I was pulling away, I saw outlines of several more people emerging from the shadows on the side of the road. A few even started running after my car, and I quickly sped off, not looking back until I felt I was a safe distance away. I called 911 once I thought I was out of danger, but to my surprise, I never received a follow-up call or any updates about the situation. It was almost as if they didn't bother checking. Looking back, I think the man at the gas station was trying to warn me, maybe even keep me from getting involved in something dangerous. Whatever the case, I'm incredibly lucky to have gotten out of that alive, and to this day, I still have no idea what those people were planning. It was a typical Friday evening after my classes ended, and I was out doing deliveries for a side job. This was my usual routine, making deliveries on weekends to cover my living expenses while at college. The night started off strong, with plenty of orders coming in and my earnings steadily climbing. However, after the dinner rush, things slowed down considerably. Orders were scarce, and the ones that did come in were low-paying, essentially a waste of time. After an hour of aimless driving, an order popped up that seemed promising. It was a bit of a drive, about 8 miles, but the payout was fair. Not great, but definitely better than the lowball offers I'd been getting. I accepted the order and walked into the restaurant to grab the food. With the bag in hand, I jumped in my car and started driving. The map showed it would take me about 30 minutes to get there, which was the longest distance I'd driven for a delivery so far. Most of the houses in the area were fairly close to campus, but this one was much farther out. After about 20 minutes, the scenery changed dramatically. There were fewer houses, and I was driving past vast stretches of farmland with nothing else around. The road became more desolate as I made my way down it. The last leg of the drive was along an isolated dirt road that wound through a farm field. Eventually, I arrived at the house. It was a small, dilapidated home tucked far back from the main road. The driveway, which was made of dirt, stretched through the field. As I drove deeper into the property, I started to feel a sense of unease. There was something off about the whole situation, even though I'm usually not easily spooked. The sound of my tires rumbling on the dirt was the only noise I could hear. I parked in front of the house, leaving the engine running. The night was still and quiet, and the house itself looked almost abandoned. The only light was coming from the porch, faintly illuminating the area around it. I grabbed the bag of food and got out of the car, making my way up to the porch through overgrown grass. I knocked on the door, glancing back at my car sitting alone in the dark, with nothing but fields behind it. I waited a moment, then knocked again. Still no answer. The house was eerily silent, and I began to feel something wasn't right. The porch light, though on, seemed out of place. Upon closer inspection, I noticed it was a solar-powered light, one that didn't require anyone to be present to function. That meant the house likely hadn't been occupied in a while. As I stood there, piecing it all together, I heard the sound of an engine. Turning around, I saw headlights approaching on the dirt road behind me. A car pulled up and stopped right behind mine. A man stepped out and stood by his vehicle, not saying a word. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the reality of the situation hitting me. The quiet of the night only made things worse. I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no one around to help. In a split second, I made a snap decision. Without thinking, I dropped the food bag and bolted from the porch, running behind the house and into the field. I glanced back, seeing the man beginning to follow me, and I pushed myself harder, weaving through the tall grass. As I ran, the grass grew thicker until it was nearly impossible to see anything in any direction. I knew by then I had gained enough distance that he couldn't catch me. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, and moved carefully through the crops, staying as quiet as possible in case the man was still looking for me. Eventually, I reached another property and found a road where I had enough signal to call for help. The police arrived, and we went back to check on my car. The man was long gone, but surprisingly, my car hadn't been touched. The food bag, however, was still sitting on the porch of the house. It was clear now, this wasn't just a robbery. The man had come there for something much more sinister. It was during a solo trip I was taking back from visiting some friends for the weekend. Normally I prefer flying, but this year the tickets are ridiculous, over $1,000 for a round trip, and that was just to a nearby state. I'd made all my plans, expecting to be back a few days before I had to work, but a massive snowstorm rolled in on the day I was supposed to leave, forcing me to stay an extra couple of days. Finally, I hit the road, and with the post-holiday calm, the highways were nearly deserted. The first few hours weren't bad at all. It's easy to zone out when you're just driving, but the snow kept me sharp. By the time it was around 10 p.m., I was getting close to my next stop, a small town with a hotel only about 2 hours away. But then, something unusual happened. I noticed a set of headlights in my rearview mirror, the first set I'd seen in quite a while. They started getting closer, fast. At first, I thought the driver was just speeding, but as they pulled up, I saw it was a large van. There was no room for me to pull over, and I figured they'd just pass me, until they didn't. Instead, they matched my speed and stayed right behind me. For the next several minutes, the van stayed at my bumper, as if it had no intention of going anywhere. It was a long stretch of road with no other cars around, and their close proximity started to make me uneasy. The exit for the gas station came up, and I decided to turn off, hoping that the van would just continue ahead. But they followed me off the ramp and into the gas station, parking directly behind me. Now I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I parked at the pump, and the van did the same. I sat there for a second, unsure of what to do. There was no one else in the station. Half the lights were off, and there was a closed sign hanging on the door. Outside, there was just snow and an empty field stretching out. with nothing in sight but a road cutting through the dark. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a man getting out of the van, walking around to pump gas. I started filling up my own car, trying to stay calm. But then the man finished, walked toward the back of the van, and suddenly, I heard the sound of the rear door opening. There was something about the moment that made my instincts flare. Something told me I needed to leave. I yanked the pump from my car, and before I even had a chance to start the engine, 3 men came running toward me from the back of the van. I jumped into my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it just as one of the men grabbed the handle, trying to open it. My heart was racing, and I didn't waste any time. I quickly shoved the car into drive, but as I looked up, I saw them running back to their van and speeding off in the opposite direction. It was like they'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I immediately called the police to report what had happened, but never heard back. Looking back, it's obvious they were trying to pull something shady, maybe even abducting people on that isolated stretch of road. What's terrifying is how calculated they were. The whole thing seemed so practiced. As soon as they realized I was safely locked in my car, they didn't even hesitate. They just left, like they had done this many times before. I'll never know exactly what their plan was, but I feel incredibly lucky. I urge anyone who's traveling alone, especially at night, to stay vigilant. Trust your instincts, because not everyone out there has good intentions. I was making a delivery to a warehouse on the West Coast coming from the Midwest. This route was one I had driven countless times over the past 20 years as a trucker, so I knew it like the back of my hand. Same highways, same rest stops, and the same routine each time. Nothing too out of the ordinary had ever happened, just the usual traffic and weather. Sure, there were a few strange occurrences over the years, but they never amounted to anything. This trip felt no different. About 20 hours in, a storm rolled in and my progress slowed. It was already late, and I was looking for the next rest stop to catch a few hours of sleep. As I was driving, a bright light appeared in my rearview mirror. The road was flat and straight, so I should have seen it coming, but this light appeared so suddenly, it caught me off guard. It wasn't until it was right behind me that I could even make out the shape of the vehicle. They must have just turned on their headlights, but they quickly closed the gap, getting so close that all I could see were their lights reflected off the back of my trailer. Then, their lights went out. At that point, I kept my speed steady, but I couldn't stop checking my mirrors. With the storm and the way they had pulled up so suddenly, I was more than a little concerned. Whoever turned off their lights in such a heavy storm and tailed so closely was making me nervous. Thankfully, a sign ahead indicated a truck stop was only 5 miles away, so I hoped that whatever was going on would end soon. Still, as a trucker, you can't help but wonder if something like this might be an attempt at a robbery, especially when you're driving alone late at night. The next 5 miles were uneventful, and I started feeling a little less anxious, even though I couldn't see anything in the storm. As I pulled into the truck stop, I checked my mirrors again, but with the rain and poor visibility, it was hard to tell if they had followed. The truck stop was nearly empty, except for a couple of trucks by the gas pumps. I parked off to the side and took a moment to gather myself before opening the door to check around. The rain had soaked me within seconds, but from what I could tell, there wasn't a vehicle anywhere behind me. I locked the truck door, grabbed my pillow and blanket from the passenger side, and tried to relax. The rain pounding on the roof made it easy to drift off to sleep, and I let the sounds of the storm block out any noises from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up, it felt like I had only been asleep for a few minutes. It was still dark, and the storm had intensified. I hadn't even had the chance to check my mirrors when a loud bang shook the truck. I froze, my heart racing, and quickly grabbed the door handle. When I opened it, I could barely make out the shape of a car with its headlights off. 2 figures were moving around in front of it. I was too terrified to step out and confront them. Just as I sat there, still processing, the truck door was suddenly slammed against my chest, pushing me back into the driver's seat. A man was standing outside, yelling for me to stay put, then slammed the door again. I saw his hand tucked into his hoodie pocket, and I knew I wasn't in a good situation. With 2 other men now behind the truck, I knew I was completely outnumbered. The truck was shaking as they watched me through the window, their eyes never leaving me. The whole situation felt like it lasted forever, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Finally, the men ran back to their car and drove off, leaving me in shock as I watched them disappear into the storm. I immediately called the police and filed a report, but there was never any follow-up on who the men were or what they wanted. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't stayed alert, but I'm sure if I had tried to drive off without paying attention, things could have turned out much worse. I was driving my delivery van home from a remote drop-off late one evening, around 11 p.m., with steady rain coming down. Normally, I didn't work this late, but now and then, there'd be a late-night order that had to be fulfilled. The places I delivered to were scattered, so most of the drive took me down long, empty stretches of highway. As I drove, I noticed headlights up ahead, and despite keeping the speed limit, I quickly caught up to them. It was an older pickup truck, crawling along well below the speed limit. It seemed like the driver was overly cautious about the wet road, but they were moving at a pace that didn't make sense. After a moment, I grew impatient and looked for a safe opportunity to pass. I sped up slightly and switched on my signal to let them know my intention, but just before I could make my move, the truck lost control and swerved off the road. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over, remaining inside my van and glancing out the side window. Somehow, the truck managed to avoid hitting several trees, but it had gone down a slope and appeared to be stuck. Even though it wasn't my fault, I felt a sense of responsibility and knew I couldn't just drive off without at least calling for help. I dialed 911, but there was no signal at all. After waiting a moment without seeing any movement, I got more uneasy, so I stepped out of my van and walked over to check on the driver. I made my way down the rain-soaked slope, carefully navigating my way past the trees until I reached the truck. It was wedged between some shrubs, but didn't seem too damaged. Approaching the driver's side, I noticed the window was fogged over, so I knocked before opening the door. Inside was a man who seemed to be frantically trying to start the truck. I asked, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" He looked up at me, silent for a few seconds before responding, "Just give me a ride." I told him I could take him to the nearest gas station so he could call for assistance, but that was as far as I was willing to go. After a moment of hesitation, he agreed. He stepped out, and I led the way back to my van. Despite the rain, he moved slowly and seemed to keep his eyes locked on me. Every time I glanced back, his gaze was fixed on mine until I looked away, which made me uncomfortable. But maybe he was just trying to make sure I wasn't a threat myself. Once inside the van, I started driving, unsure of how far the nearest gas station was, but assuming it wasn't more than 50 or 60 miles away. For the first few minutes, I tried making small talk, but the man barely responded. I thought perhaps he was disoriented from the crash, but it made the ride feel incredibly awkward. Every so often I would look over and he'd be staring at me. No smile, no frown, just watching. I couldn't help but wonder who he really was. Most people in his situation would be thankful for a ride, yet he seemed detached, almost too calm. Luckily, not long into the drive, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. But as we got closer, the man's behavior became even stranger. He was looking around constantly, both inside the van and outside the windows. When I finally pulled into the gas station, I parked the van and asked if he needed anything else. He didn't answer, but there was a strange tension in the air, like he was considering something. I tried to break the silence. "Okay, well, I'll be on my way now." But just then, the man suddenly lunged at me, pushing me against the door, and began punching me as I tried to open it. Before I could fully react, the passenger door flew open, and the man was pulled away from me. I stumbled out of the van, still disoriented, not sure what had just happened. When I looked around, I saw 2 police cars and officers restraining the man. They didn't give me all the details, but apparently, he'd been running from a serious crime and had stolen the truck. When officers found the truck wrecked by the side of the road, they set up a stakeout at the nearby gas station. They didn't know I'd picked him up, but as soon as they saw him attack me, they moved in to intervene. I'm not sure if he attacked me because he wanted to steal my van or if he thought I had turned him in when he saw the police, but either way, it was terrifying. I knew he seemed off, but I had no idea how dangerous the situation really was. If the officers hadn't been there waiting, I'm not sure I'd be here now. This happened to me about a year ago when I worked at a 24-hour convenience store. It's a job many people think is uneventful, but that night turned out to be different. The rain wasn't too heavy, but enough to make it uncomfortable to be outside. Since it was a slow night, there weren't many customers coming in to buy snacks or fuel up. My main task was just to be there, making sure everything was in order. I'd walk around a bit to stay awake, but most of the time I was just scrolling through social media on my phone. Out of nowhere, I heard a tapping sound from outside. I looked up and saw a figure standing at the glass door. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood. I waved at him, signaling that the door was open, but he kept tapping as if he didn't notice. I walked over, opened the door, and greeted him. Without acknowledging me, he walked past and headed straight for the counter. It struck me as odd how unaware he seemed. I returned to the counter and he asked for a pack of cigarettes, paying with cash. He left, and as I glanced out the window, I noticed something strange. There were no cars in the lot or near the gas pumps. The man continued walking down the road, heading straight into the rain like it was no big deal. I found myself puzzled. If his car had broken down, I would have expected him to buy gas or ask for help, but he didn't. He just left with a pack of cigarettes, and that was it. The next hour was uneventful, but the encounter still lingered in my mind. I was in the middle of restocking when I heard another tap on the door. I walked over to find the same man standing outside. I opened the door and asked if he was okay. He didn't answer, but instead pointed down the road. "Down the road," he said. I squinted into the distance but saw nothing. Then my gaze fell on a gas can by one of the pumps. He pointed to it and said, "Help." It clicked that he might not speak much English. I agreed to help and walked over to the pump with him. He handed me a credit card, and I began filling the gas can. He stood behind me, staying out of sight, which made me uneasy. Once the can was full, I handed it to him. But before I could go back inside, He grabbed my arm and started speaking in a hurry. I tried pulling away, but just then, I heard a noise from inside. I looked through the door and saw a man inside the store, hurriedly stuffing things into his backpack. The moment he saw me, he jumped over the counter. Everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on the floor with a pounding headache. It felt like just a few minutes had passed. I realized the man behind me must have hit me to help his accomplice escape. The cops were called, and they took me to the hospital. Fortunately, I only had a concussion and a few stitches. The worst part was the feeling of embarrassment, like I had let them pull one over on me so easily. Looking back, I'm glad I blacked out when I did. The CCTV footage revealed that the man inside had a gun. If I'd tried to stop him or even made a move to confront him, things could have ended much worse. My house was empty for the week since my roommate was away, and it was spring break, so my classes were on pause too. With no plans for Monday, I found myself stuck inside because of a massive storm hitting our city. This type of weather wasn't unusual for this time of year, but every time it happened, it felt worse. The trees were bending sideways, and the house groaned as the wind howled. Knowing I wouldn't be able to get any rest, I decided to stay up. I grabbed the Xbox controller and started playing one of my favorite games, losing track of time. It must have been around 12 a.m. when the doorbell rang. I paused the game, unsure what to make of it. With the storm raging outside, who would be out there? I went over to the front door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door and the rain hit me hard, but I didn't see anyone. I closed the door, thinking maybe the wind had somehow made the doorbell ring on its own. It sounded ridiculous, but I didn't know what else to think. I returned to my game, but just a few minutes later I heard a loud crash from the backyard. Something had fallen over and broken. I immediately realized it was our patio furniture and rushed to the back door. Outside, everything was scattered across the yard, being tossed by the wind. I grabbed my shoes and went outside to gather the pieces, each one being pushed by the strong wind. It hurt at times when the rain hit my face. I hurried as fast as I could, and that's when I saw someone standing at the edge of the yard, watching me. I froze for a second, but quickly grabbed the last piece of furniture and ran back inside, trying to get away from the rain. When I looked out the back door as I dried off, the person had disappeared. Between the strange doorbell and the figure outside, I started to feel uneasy. I decided to sit in the living room, scrolling through my phone to distract myself. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I grabbed a blanket to lie down on the couch. I didn't want to go upstairs. The storm was even louder up there. After some time, I finally managed to drift off to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly from a burst of strong wind outside shaking the house. I threw off the blanket and sat up, planning to check on the furniture outside. But when my feet hit the floor, they were soaked. I looked down to find a puddle right next to the couch. Then, I noticed more puddles, leading a trail across the floor. And inside those puddles were faint, muddy footprints. I jumped up and rushed to the far corner of the room, my mind racing. After a moment of hearing nothing but the storm outside, I quietly followed the footprints. They led through the house, up and down the stairs. It was clear the person had entered through the back door, which I'd foolishly forgotten to lock in my rush to get out of the rain. I quickly locked it and grabbed my phone to dial 911. But then, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if they were still inside? I stayed still, trying to hide as best as I could, then called the police. I waited in silence until they arrived. When they checked the house, they saw everything I had, but no one had taken anything. They said it seemed like a targeted incident, like someone had focused entirely on my house. They told me it didn't make sense. If the person had wanted to harm me, they would have done it when they were so close to me while I was sleeping. After thinking about it for a while, I realized they must have been looking for my roommate. They saw me, checked the place, and then left without doing anything. It felt like a personal attack, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if my roommate had been there, things might have gone much differently.
I was a new student starting my junior year without knowing a soul. Everyone had their groups, their established friendships. The worst part was lunchtime. My school required juniors to stay on campus, so I had to eat in the cafeteria. I dreaded it, knowing I'd have no one to sit with, and forcing my way into a random table seemed awkward. When lunchtime arrived, I walked in with my tray, scanning for an empty spot. Almost every table was full. But there was one in the farthest corner with only 2 students sitting there, a guy and a girl, both dressed in dark clothes, whispering to each other. It was my best option, so I walked over and asked if I could sit. They exchanged glances. Then the girl told me to sit. As I sat, I noticed something odd about them. They both had friendly tone, and while talking to me, their eyes stayed on me in a creepy way. They introduced themselves as Eli and June. They weren't exactly warm, but they talked to me. They even invited me to hang out after school. I figured, why not? It was better than being alone. After school, I got a text from Eli. He told me they had a secret spot they hung out at, an abandoned house a few blocks away, near the woods. He said it was the perfect place, and some of their friends were having a party there. That should have been my first red flag, but I was desperate for friends, so I agreed. By 9 p.m., I was on my way there. The house was barely standing, its windows boarded up, its front door slightly ajar. My phone buzzed. It was June. Come inside. We're upstairs. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of rot and mildew. I used my flashlight to find my way up the creaky stairs. Eli, June. My voice cut through the stillness, but no one answered. Then soft footsteps coming from the hall ahead. My phone buzzed again. A text from Eli, "We see you." A chill ran through me. My flashlight flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard whispering, low, almost guttural. I spun around, pointing the dim beam of light down the hallway. 2 figures stood at the end of it. Eli and June. But they were different. Their skin looked black, their eyes completely red, their mouths twisted into eerie smiles. I took a step back. My gut screamed at me to run. The whispering got louder, but neither of them moved. Then, without warning, they lunged. I turned and sprinted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic. As I burst through the front door, I felt something claw at my shirt. I yanked free and ran all the way home, heart pounding. I locked my bedroom door that night, trying to convince myself it was a prank. But just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone buzzed. A picture message. It was a photo of my bedroom window, from outside. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They called the school, but when we checked the records, there were no students named Eli or June. Also, there were no texts or messages in my account from any number. I don't know who I met that night, but sometimes I still wake up to the sound of whispering just outside my window. My name is Claire Parker, and I'm 17 years old. We had a substitute teacher, an older guy, probably mid-50s. He wasn't particularly strange at first, just the usual dry, half-interested demeanor that most subs had. He read from a lesson plan, assigned some work, then sat at the desk scrolling through his phone. It wasn't until halfway through class that I realized he kept looking up at me. Not in an obvious way, but every time I glanced up from my notebook, I caught him shifting his eyes away. I ignored it. Maybe I was imagining things. With 10 minutes left in class, he stood up and walked around the room, stopping at different desks to check on our work. When he got to me, he lingered a little too long, his fingers tapping on my desk as he pretended to look over my answers. Then he murmured something I couldn't hear, so I asked, "What?" He smiled. "You remind me of someone I used to know." That made me uneasy, but I just forced a polite laugh and went back to my work. When the bell rang, I packed up and left as quickly as I could. The next class was study hall in the library, and I took my usual seat near the back. About 10 minutes in, I felt the air shift behind me. Someone had walked up close. I turned, and there he was. The sub. "What are you working on?" he asked. I lied and said I was studying for a test. He nodded slowly like he didn't believe me, then stepped away. But as he left, he lightly tapped the back of my chair. For the rest of the period, I felt off. Not scared exactly, just unsettled. When the last bell rang, I took my time packing up, letting most of the students leave ahead of me. As I walked toward the hallway, I saw him again, standing by the main entrance, arms crossed, like he was waiting for someone. I pretended not to see him and ducked into the restroom instead. The school was almost empty now. I waited a few minutes, then peeked out into the hallway. He was gone. Relieved, I started toward the back doors to head home. The hallway was silent, my footsteps echoing. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a quiet, deliberate click. The lights went out. I froze. The only illumination was from the fading daylight bleeding in through the small square windows on the doors. I took a breath, trying to stay calm, but my body was already reacting. Then, in the dim light, I saw movement. A shape at the end of the hallway. It was him. He was standing still, barely visible. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted for the doors, shoving them open and bursting into the cool evening air. I ran across the lot, down the sidewalk, not slowing until I reached my street. By the time I got home, I was out of breath, my hands shaking. I never told anyone, not my parents, not my friends. I didn't even know what to say. The next day, the regular teacher was back. The sub was gone, and no one ever mentioned him again. When I was in high school, I worked as a student aide in the library. It was an easy gig, mostly shelving books and watching the clock. The library had 2 levels, the main floor, where everyone studied, and the basement, which held old books, broken chairs, and stuff nobody cared about. It was always quiet down there, and the lighting was terrible. Most students didn't even know it existed. One afternoon, Miss Carter, the librarian, asked me to retrieve a box of outdated reference books from the basement. I didn't mind. It gave me an excuse to be away from the front desk. I grabbed the keys, unlocked the heavy metal door, and descended the stairs. It smelled musty, like old paper and dust. Rows of shelves lined the room, some covered with sheets like forgotten furniture in an abandoned house. I found the box near the back wall, but just as I picked it up, the overhead lights flickered and shut off completely. The entire basement went pitch black. I pulled out my phone, but there was barely any signal. No flashlight either. Just the faint glow of the screen. I waited, assuming it was some electrical issue. But then I heard something. A shuffle. It came from somewhere between the shelves. I turned off my phone screen, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone else come down. "Miss Carter," I whispered. Nothing, just silence. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps, moving closer. I swallowed hard. My brain tried to rationalize it. A janitor, maybe. But why wouldn't they say anything? The steps stopped just a few feet away, hidden by the darkness. Then I heard it. Something dragging across the floor like a heavy object being pulled. Then breathing. Not normal breathing. Shaky, uneven gasps, like someone struggling to contain their excitement. I pressed my back against the shelves, trying to make myself smaller. The silence stretched unbearably, and then suddenly a whisper, hoarse, playful, right in front of me, calling me by my name. I felt creeped out. I turned on my phone screen for just a second. The glow barely illuminated the room, but it was enough to see a shape crouched between the shelves, low, motionless. I didn't think. I just ran, slamming into bookshelves in the dark, knocking over piles of dusty books. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled into the main floor of the library. The warm overhead lights felt unreal after the darkness below. Ms. Carter glanced up from her desk, raising an eyebrow. "You all right?" I turned back to the basement door, but no one came out. No sound followed. When I told Ms. Carter what happened, she frowned. No one else was scheduled to be down there. She walked over, flicked the basement lights on, and called down the stairs. But nothing was in the basement. When security checked later, they found a single shelf completely cleared, books scattered across the floor like someone had crawled between them. But the cameras, they only showed me going in. And to this day, I never went down there alone. It started as a dumb dare. Sneaking into our old high school's abandoned west wing, the part of the building that had been sealed off for years. Nobody really talked about why it was closed. Some said it was due to asbestos. Others whispered about an incident that got covered up. Either way, we wanted to see for ourselves. There was an old maintenance tunnel that led into the basement, hidden behind a rusted fence on the side of the school. We knew about it because Tyler's older brother used to work janitorial shifts before he graduated. The tunnel entrance was a metal door with a broken padlock, hanging open just enough for us to slip through one by one. Inside, the air was thick, damp, and smelled of rot. Dim emergency lights buzzed along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows as we crept forward. The deeper we went, the quieter everything felt, like the walls were swallowing sound. We finally reached the basement of the West Wing. It was worse than we imagined. Storage boxes stacked haphazardly, old desks covered in graffiti, and a few overturned chairs. The worst part, the unnatural stillness. It felt like the whole place was waiting. Then we heard it, footsteps. We all stopped to listen. The sound was moving somewhere beyond the stacked boxes. It didn't sound like a janitor. It was too careful. Like whoever was walking didn't want to be heard, but also didn't mind if they were. Tyler pointed ahead. A door, probably, led to the upper floors. "Let's go," he mouthed, and we moved in sync, keeping low. As we pushed through the door, we found ourselves in a long, pitch-black hallway. The air was colder here, stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. The exit signs barely glowed red, and the lockers lining the walls were dented and scratched. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The lockers. Some of them had marks, long, jagged scratches, as if something had clawed at them. Others had words scrawled in red. At first I thought it was graffiti, but as I stared I realized it was the same phrase, repeated over and over. "Don't open the doors." I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Tyler. His face had a scared expression. He motioned toward the far end of the hall, a single door, and from the crack the faintest sliver of light seeped through. Then the whispers started. They were soft, nearly imperceptible, like someone murmuring from far away. But they weren't coming from the door. They were coming from the lockers. I stepped closer, heart hammering, my breath fogged in the cold air as I pressed an ear against one of the locker doors. A faint voice, hoarse, desperate. "Help me!" I stumbled back. Tyler grabbed my arm, shaking his head. "We need to go." Now but Josh was already pushing the door open. The room beyond was bathed in the flickering glow of an old CRT television, sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty classroom. The screen was full of static, crackling like distant whispers. Josh took a step inside. Then the TV cut to black. We heard footsteps coming toward us from the hallway. We didn't wait. Grabbing Josh, we sprinted back the way we came, crashing through the basement door, down the tunnels, and out into the night air. As we turned back, we saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the threshold of the tunnel, watching us. Tall, its face was nothing but darkness. The next day, Tyler checked the West Wing. Still sealed. No maintenance tunnel, no way in. In 2019, I moved into a small apartment near my university. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of an old complex. The place was cheap, which should have been a red flag. But as a broke college student, I didn't have the luxury of being picky. It had character, as people like to say when something is just old. Faded wallpaper, uneven floors, and a draft that never went away, no matter how many times I checked the windows. The first night, as I was unpacking, I heard something strange. A faint whisper. Not words, just the sound of breath slipping through barely parted lips. I froze, listening. It was so quiet that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But the longer I stood there, the more certain I became. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the floor. I tried to shake it off. Old buildings make weird noises. Creaking pipes, shifting wood. Nothing unusual. But over the next few nights, the whispering continued. Always around 3 a.m. Faint, drawn-out breaths slipping through the cracks between the floorboards beneath my bed. At first I ignored it. I told myself it was just the way the building settled. But the more I listened, the more I swore the sound was deliberate, rhythmic, like something trying to form words. One night I decided to record it. I placed my phone on the floor, hit record, and waited. The whispering came, soft and insistent. After a minute, I stopped the recording and played it back. Nothing. Just static. That should have been the end of it, but instead it made everything worse. The next night I woke up gasping. I had been dreaming, feeling, like someone was standing over me. The sensation was so real that my entire body seized up before I even opened my eyes. When I finally did, the room was empty, but something felt off. Then I noticed my rug. It had shifted. Not just a little, completely flipped back, exposing the wood beneath. My stomach dropped. My hands shook as I reached down and pulled the rug away completely. The floor was scratched. Long, uneven gouges stretched across the wood, as if someone, or something, had been clawing at it. And then I saw something that sent ice down my spine. Between the wooden planks, through the thin, splintered cracks, there was an eye, wide, unblinking, staring up at me from beneath the floor. I screamed and jumped back so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My breath came in sharp gasps as I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking as I turned on the flashlight. But when I shined it on the floor, there was nothing, no scratches, no gaps, no eye, just solid wood. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I had seen it. I knew I had. But the floor looked completely untouched. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I called my landlord. I told him something was wrong with the apartment, that I wanted to break my lease. He didn't even argue. Just sighed and said, "You lasted longer than most." His words made my skin crawl. I demanded to know what he meant, and after a long silence, he finally told me. Years ago, a woman who lived in my unit had gone missing. Months later, they found her body, beneath the floorboards, right under where my bed had been. No one ever figured out how she got there, or who put her there. That was all I needed to hear. I packed my things and left that same day. This happened during my freshman year in college. I lived on the 4th floor of a co-ed dorm, one of the older buildings on campus. It had a long, dimly lit hallway with creaky floors and an outdated security system that barely worked. At first, everything was normal. I had a few friends in my classes and got along well with my roommate. But there was one person I kept seeing, too often for it to be a coincidence. He was tall, lanky, with shaggy blonde hair that always seemed slightly damp, like he had just stepped out of a shower. He lived somewhere down the hall, but I never saw him talking to anyone. It started subtly. I'd see him leaving his room just as I was heading to class. Then I'd catch him sitting alone in the dining hall at a table near mine. I even spotted him in the campus library once, staring blankly at his laptop screen without typing anything. It was weird, but I told myself it was just chance. Then, one evening, things escalated. I had just come back from a late study session and was unlocking my door when I felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and there he was, standing at the far end of the hallway, his gaze fixed on me. He wasn't moving, just standing there. I rushed inside, locked the door, and tried to shake off the unease. A few nights later, my roommate was gone for the weekend. I was alone, studying at my desk when I heard something faint, a slow, deliberate knocking. It was coming from the other side of my door. I froze. It wasn't a knock, just tapping. I crept toward the peephole, but before I could look, the handle jiggled. Someone was testing if the door was locked. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away. After a moment, the jiggling stopped. Silence. I stayed up all night, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, I left my room cautiously, scanning the hallway. No one was there. A few days passed, and I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe I was just exhausted from studying too much. But then came the worst night of all. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up suddenly, feeling off. The air in my room was still, but something was wrong. That's when I noticed it. My closet door, which had been shut when I went to bed, was open, like someone had been peeking out. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. My phone was on my nightstand, but I didn't dare reach for it. My breath felt too loud. I stared at the dark gap in the closet, expecting something to happen. Then, barely audible, I heard it. Something was moving inside the closet. I acted on instinct. I lunged for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it at the closet. But it was empty. But something was off. My clothes had been pushed to the side. The small crawl space behind them, one I had never used, was slightly open. I ran. I bolted out of my room, down the hallway, and straight to the RA's room, banging on his door until he woke up. Security was called, and when they checked my room, they found something that still makes my skin crawl. Inside the crawl space, there was a small blanket, a half-empty bottle of water, and a notebook. The notebook was filled with pages and pages of scribbled notes about me. What time I left for class, what time I went to sleep, what I wore on different days, and one sentence written over and over: she doesn't know yet. Campus security identified the guy. Blonde hair. He had a key to my room. Apparently, he had stolen the master key from a janitor's closet weeks ago. He had been sneaking in, hiding, watching me. He was expelled, arrested. I never saw him again, but to this day I sleep with my closet door shut and triple-check my locks, because I'll never forget that night. It was during my junior year of college when I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I went to a mid-sized university where you could walk from one end of campus to the other in about 25 minutes. I lived in an older dorm building on the far edge of campus, a little separated from the main academic buildings. It wasn't uncommon for me to stay late in the library, especially during exam season, but that night I had stayed far later than usual. I lost track of time while reviewing for an important test, and by the time I looked at the clock it was already past 1 a.m. The library was mostly empty by then, except for a couple of students scattered in different corners. I packed up my things and headed out into the cold night. The campus was eerily silent. The streetlights flickered faintly, barely illuminating the deserted walkways. As I made my way down the main path, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, like something wasn't quite right. I chalked it up to exhaustion and picked up my pace. About halfway back to my dorm, I noticed something strange. A man stood motionless beneath one of the dim streetlights, near an old classroom building. He wasn't a student. His posture was too rigid, his clothes too out of place. He wore a long coat and his face was partially obscured by shadows. I tried not to stare, but as I walked past, I could feel his gaze locked onto me. I kept walking, resisting the urge to look back, but a minute later I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. At first they were distant, almost cautious, but as I continued, they quickened. My heart pounding as I stole a glance over my shoulder and saw him. He was following me, his long coat shifting with each step. I turned onto a narrower path that cut through a small courtyard. The shortcut would get me to my dorm faster. I picked up my pace, but so did he. The closer I got to my building, the heavier my legs felt, my body wanting to run, but my mind unsure if I should. As I approached my dorm's entrance, I reached into my pocket for my keycard. My fingers fumbled over it as I swiped, the door unlocking with a soft beep. I slipped inside and made sure the door clicked shut behind me. The lobby was empty. I exhaled, thinking I was safe. But then, a sickening realization dawned on me. There was another entrance on the side of the building, one that didn't require a keycard if someone caught the door before it fully closed. And worse, I had just seen one of my dorm mates leaving through it moments before I entered. I bolted for the stairs, my room on the 3rd floor. Just as I reached the 2nd, I heard the heavy creak of the lobby door opening. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps entering the hallway. I reached my floor and sprinted down the corridor. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. As I shoved the key into the lock, I stole one last glance down the hallway. My stomach dropped. The man was standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring directly at me. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing, just silence. Then, after what felt like an hour, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps moving away. I called campus security immediately. When they arrived, they searched the building and found him in the basement. He wasn't a student. He had no reason to be there. And the scariest part. When they reviewed the security footage, they found he had been standing outside the library before I even left. When I was in middle school, I wasn't the most social kid. I mostly kept to myself, reading or doodling in my notebook. My parents were strict, and they never let me stay after school unless it was for something important. But one evening, I had to stay late for a project with a few classmates in the school library. It was a Thursday, and we were supposed to be out by 5:30 p.m. My mom had promised to pick me up right after work, but by the time we packed up, my group had already left and I was the last student in the library. The librarian, an older woman with thick glasses, told me she was closing up soon and that I should wait near the front entrance. I waited. 15 minutes passed. My mom still hadn't shown up. I checked my phone, no messages, no calls. The school halls were completely silent, and the lights in some of the classrooms were already off. The only sound was the faint hum of the vending machine near the front desk. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. At first I thought it was the librarian, but when I turned my head, I saw a man standing just outside the glass doors of the library. He was tall, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He held something in his hands, a clipboard maybe. His eyes locked on me. The librarian, who was packing up her things, noticed him too. She smiled and walked toward the door. "Oh, you must be her ride," she said, unlocking it. That's when I felt something was wrong. The man looked at me again. His smile was forced, almost rehearsed. "Yeah, her mom sent me," he said smoothly. "She's stuck in traffic, asked me to pick her up instead." It felt strange. My mom never sent other people to pick me up. Never. The librarian turned to me. "Go on, dear, it's late." I didn't move. The man's smile widened. "Come on, kiddo. Don't want to keep your mom waiting, right?" My throat was dry. I glanced at the librarian, but she had already gathered her things and was flipping off the light switches. She wasn't paying attention anymore. That's when he reached for my arm. I yanked myself back and shook my head. My mom didn't tell me anyone was coming. The librarian sighed, clearly annoyed. "Oh, don't be difficult. This gentleman is just helping out." She turned back to the man. "I can sign her out for you if you need." I was panicking now. The man nodded quickly, then looked at me. His voice lowered just a little. "Let's go." My heart was hammering in my chest. I was about to scream when my phone rang. It was my mom. I snatched it out of my pocket and answered instantly. "Mom, where are you?" She sounded confused. "I'm in the parking lot. Where are you?" I froze. I slowly turned to look at the man. His face twitched for just a second. Then, before anyone could say anything, he turned and walked briskly out of the building, disappearing into the dark parking lot. The librarian frowned. That was strange. I didn't say anything. I just ran to the front doors and bolted outside. My mom was sitting in the car, completely unaware of what had just happened. When I told her everything, she was horrified. There were some kids messing around in that area. She stormed back into the school to tell the librarian, but by then, the man was long gone. The school checked their visitor records the next day. No one had signed in under that name. No one matching his description had any reason to be there. I still don't know who he was. It was the last week of school, and even though summer break was right around the corner, there was a strange tension hanging in the air. I was in middle school at the time, and usually this time of year meant coasting through the last few days with barely any work. Teachers were more relaxed, and kids were just waiting for the final bell to ring. It was the end of the day, and I was in my last class, history. Our teacher had put on a documentary, probably to kill time, and most of the students were either whispering or dozing off. I remember feeling a sudden urge to go to the bathroom, so I asked for a pass and stepped out into the hallway. The second I stepped outside the classroom, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. Normally, even if the halls were empty, you could hear murmurs from classrooms, the distant echo of a teacher lecturing, but now, complete silence. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I shook it off, convincing myself I was just overthinking it. The closest bathrooms were down the hall, past the library. As I walked, I heard the sound of footsteps ahead, just around the corner. I hesitated for a second, but kept walking, rounding the corner just in time to see a figure disappearing into the library. I didn't get a good look, but something about the way they moved unsettled me. No one was supposed to be in the library this late in the day, especially not when all the books had already been packed up for the summer. Curious, but cautious, I kept going. I finally reached the bathroom and pushed the door open. Only one of the fluorescent lights was working, flickering faintly. As I stepped inside, I caught movement in the mirror, just a shadow, shifting slightly in the last stall. My breath hitched. Someone was in there. I tried to convince myself it was just another student, but my gut told me otherwise. I took a step back, deciding to leave. The second my foot scraped against the tile, the stall door creaked, slowly. It didn't open all the way, just enough for me to see a sliver of darkness between the door and the frame. Then I heard something. It sounded like someone whispering, "Help me." My body froze. The voice was strained, weak. Whoever was inside wasn't moving. Something about it felt wrong. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I swallowed hard and managed to say, "Are you okay?" But nothing, just silence. Then the stall door creaked open just a little more. Then Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The flickering bulb died, plunging the entire bathroom into darkness. I didn't wait. I turned and bolted, nearly slamming into the door on my way out. The second I was back in the hallway, I stopped, chest heaving. The hallway was still empty, still too quiet. I glanced back at the bathroom door, expecting to see someone step out, but no one did. Just as I was about to run back to class, a sound echoed from inside, a dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the classroom, slamming the door behind me. My teacher and classmates looked at me, startled. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to explain what had just happened. But when I turned to look at the hallway through the door's window, it was completely empty. Nothing. No shadow. No sound. Just the empty, quiet hallway. I never used that bathroom again. In fact, I avoided even walking near the library for the rest of the year. I asked some teachers about it a few days later, but they all gave me the same confused look. There's no bathroom near the library, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. My name is Iris, and I'm 24 years old. Back in middle school, I was in the choir. I wasn't the best singer, but my mom always encouraged me to stick with it. I think she liked the idea of me being in something structured, something safe. Our choir teacher, Mr. Bennett, was well liked by the school. He was in his late 40s, always wearing the same navy blazer, and had this habit of tapping his fingers against his leg whenever he spoke. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he wasn't strict either. I struggled with my harmonies, so Mr. Bennett started offering to tutor me after school. At first, these lessons were in the choir room, just the two of us, sitting at the piano while he played my part over and over again. I didn't like the way the school halls felt when they were empty, but I figured I was just being paranoid. Then, after a few weeks, he started suggesting I come to his house for lessons. I wasn't comfortable with the idea. I mean, why would I need to go to his house? The choir room had everything we needed. But he kept pushing, casually bringing it up at the end of every lesson. You'll improve faster without distractions, he'd say. My home piano is much better than this one. I always said no. One afternoon, I stayed late for a group rehearsal for an upcoming winter concert. Most of the other students had left early, so when practice ended, I was the last one waiting for my ride. My mom was running late. I sat on the cold stone steps outside the school, watching as the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Mr. Bennett stepped outside. Still waiting, he asked. I nodded, avoiding eye contact. You know, my house is just a few minutes away, he said, that nervous finger tapping starting up again. You can wait there. I'll even give your mom a call for you. Something about the way he said it gave me creeps. I told him no. He smiled, nodded, but didn't leave. He just stood there, shifting on his feet. All right, well, I'll be in my car if you change your mind. I watched as he walked toward the parking lot. He wasn't heading to the teacher's lot, though. He was going to the back of the school where hardly anyone parked. Something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone and tried calling my mom, but my phone battery is dead. A few minutes passed. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard something else. Purposeful sound of someone walking normally. These were coming from behind the building. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow slipping around the corner. I shot up from the steps. I called out, "Mom!" hoping she had finally arrived, but no answer. I backed up against the front doors. They were locked. My mind was racing. Was I overreacting? Was it just another teacher? Then I saw Mr. Bennett was standing at the edge of the building, just barely visible in the dim light. His blazer was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were curled into fists. "Let's go," he said. His voice was flat, like he was stating a fact, not making a request. Every instinct in me screamed run. I bolted down the steps, heading straight for the sidewalk. I didn't stop to see if he was following me. I just ran. I turned the corner, expecting to see my mom's car, but nothing. A car door slammed behind me. I spun around. Mr. Bennett was getting into his car, an old black sedan. He pulled out onto the street, moving slow, matching my pace. I tried to act like I didn't notice, like I wasn't absolutely terrified. Then, finally, I see my mom's car headlights. I sprinted into the street, waving my arms frantically. She hit the brakes, her face contorted in confusion. I yanked open the door and dove inside, locking it immediately. "Go," I said. She didn't ask questions. She just drove. I turned in my seat, watching as Mr. Bennett's car slowed to a stop at the intersection. He didn't follow us. I never went to another after-school rehearsal again. and a week later we were informed that Mr. Bennett had resigned from his position. No one ever said why, but I think I know. My name is Daniel. I graduated from the University of Michigan in 2018. College was a blur of late-night study sessions, tailgate parties, and the occasional existential crisis about my future. I made great friends, got decent grades, and even landed a respectable job in finance right after graduation. Looking back, my time at Michigan was great, except for one night in my sophomore year that I still can't explain. It was mid-October, and my roommate Eric and I were in the thick of internship hunting. Everyone we knew was obsessing over their resumes and LinkedIn profiles. The pressure was getting to me, and I desperately needed a break. That's when I got an email that seemed almost too good to be true. A small but well-known investment firm had reached out, stating they'd come across my profile and wanted to interview me. What was odd was that I hadn't even applied there. I figured they must have seen my credentials through a mutual connection or career portal, so I didn't think too much of it. The email was signed by someone named Brandon LeClaire. A quick Google search turned up nothing. No LinkedIn profile, no company bio, nothing. That made me pause, but Eric waved it off. Maybe he's just old school, he suggested. I agreed and replied to set up the interview. Brandon responded almost instantly, providing a time and place. 7 p.m. the next evening at a cafe on the outskirts of Ann Arbor. That was another red flag. Why not an office? Why not even a known coffee shop? Still, my curiosity got the better of me. The next evening, I took an Uber to the address. As soon as I arrived, the cafe was just an empty lot. The whole street was eerily silent. A few old brick buildings stood nearby, but they looked abandoned. I checked my phone. No messages from Brandon. Just as I was about to call Eric to come pick me up, a voice called my name. I turned to see a tall, clean-cut man in an expensive gray suit standing beside a black SUV. He smiled and approached me, extending a hand. "Daniel, good to meet you," he said smoothly. "Sorry about the location mix-up. The cafe closed last week, but we can still talk. Hop in and we'll go somewhere better." My mind told me not to get into that car. His explanation seemed too convenient, and something about his tone was strange. I forced a polite smile. "Actually, I think I'll pass. Maybe we can reschedule for a more formal setting." His expression changed slightly, but he quickly covered it with another easy smile. "Come on, no need to be so stiff. Just a short drive." He gestured to the car again. That's when I saw through the SUV's tinted window, just barely visible in the dim streetlight, was a shadowy figure slumped in the back seat. Something about the stillness of the shape inside was deeply wrong, as I noticed the slight gleam of something metallic in the figure's hand, something long and sharp. Without another word, I spun on my heel and sprinted back down the street. Behind me, I heard the car door slam and footsteps pounding after me. As I turned a corner, searching frantically for cover, that's when I saw it, a narrow alleyway with a rusty fire escape just within reach. I leapt, grabbing the ladder and hauling myself up with every ounce of strength I had. Below, I heard Brandon curse loudly. The SUV's engine roared to life. I scrambled onto the metal platform and pressed myself against the cold brick wall, barely daring to breathe. Seconds later, the SUV screeched onto the street below. The passenger side door opened and another man stepped out. Unlike Brandon, this one was dressed casually, but he moved with a terrifying precision. He looked up, scanning the fire escape. I was terrified he saw me. He didn't shout or call for me to come down. He just stared, head tilted slightly, as if debating something. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded once, got back in the car, and the SUV sped off into the night. I stayed on that fire escape for a solid 10 minutes before finally calling Eric, voice shaking as I explained what happened. He was there in record time. He helped me down and drove me back to our dorm. I never heard from Brandon again. No follow-up email, no explanation. When I tried looking up the investment firm, I found out that they'd closed down years ago. I transferred to a new college last semester, and since I applied late, I was stuck with whatever dorm they had left. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't care much as long as I had a place to sleep. My assigned roommate, Alex, didn't respond to my messages before move-in day, so I figured I'd just meet him in person. When I arrived, his side of the room was already set up. Posters of random symbols I didn't recognize covered his walls, along with drawings of faces, distorted ones. I greeted him as he sat at his desk, hunched over something I couldn't see. He turned slowly, as if surprised I was there. He was lanky, pale, and had a permanent blank expression. His dark eyes seemed to bore into me before he nodded and turned back around. No words, no introduction, just that eerie stare. I tried to get settled, but the room felt creepy. It smelled stale, like damp paper and something metallic. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispering, like it was drifting through the vents, but it got louder. I realized it was coming from Alex's side of the room. I peeked over. He sat cross-legged on his bed, back facing me, muttering something over and over. I couldn't understand it, but it had a almost chant-like quality. I shifted in my bed, and the whispering stopped abruptly. Alex turned his head slightly as if listening for my movement, then lay down without a word. Things got weirder over the next few weeks. He never left the room, never went to class. I'd leave in the morning, come back in the evening, and he'd be in the same position, scribbling into a notebook or staring at his wall of distorted faces. I once asked what he was always drawing. He looked at me for an uncomfortably long time before saying, "People I've met." I checked out his desk when he went to the bathroom one night. His notebook was filled with frantic sketches of faces, but when I flipped further, he had drawn me. Over and over, my face was in different expressions: fear, anger, sadness. Some had my eyes scratched out. Others had my mouth sewn shut. I shoved the notebook back and lay in bed, forcing myself to breathe evenly as he returned. I didn't sleep that night. I barely slept the nights after that, waking up to the sound of his whispering, or worse, his quiet giggling in the dark. I kept trying to tell myself I was overthinking it, that he was just weird, not dangerous. But then I don't know why, but I want to look inside his box. It was under his bed, peeking out just slightly one evening when he had gone to shower. I pulled it out. Inside were small items, things I had lost: my old keychain, a broken pen, a strand of my hair twisted around a toothpick. But the worst part, a small Polaroid of me sleeping. I felt scared. I never took a picture like this. He must have. While I was asleep, I shoved the box back just as he walked in. He froze in the doorway, eyes locking onto mine. He wasn't holding anything, just standing there watching. The room felt suffocating. After what felt like hours, he finally smiled, small, forced, unnatural. "Found what you were looking for." I didn't answer. I didn't move. He walked to his bed. I packed my things that night and begged the RA to move me. They didn't have space, so I started sleeping in the study hall. A few days later, I returned to grab my things and found Alex's side of the room completely empty, as if he was never there. No one knew where he went, no withdrawal records, no sign he ever attended classes, just gone. But the real horror. I found his notebook under my bed when I moved out. Flipping to the last page, there was only one sentence, written in shaky, uneven handwriting: "Not this time."
I've been a long-haul truck driver for nearly 12 years now. I've seen my fair share of weird things on the road: shadows moving where they shouldn't, strange figures standing by the highway in the dead of night, even headlights that seem to follow me for miles before vanishing without a trace. But nothing has ever unsettled me as much as what happened on a stretch of empty road in the middle of Utah. It was a late-night haul, moving furniture and boxes for a family relocating from Nevada to Colorado. I left just before sundown, planning to drive through most of the night and make it to their new place by morning. The first few hours were uneventful, just me, the hum of the truck, and miles of open road stretching into the darkness. Around 2 a.m., I was driving through an area with no towns or exits for miles. The road was flanked by desert on either side, an endless expanse of sand and rock that seemed even more desolate under the moonlight. That's when I saw it. A figure was standing on the side of the road, just barely visible in the glow of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, but as I got closer, something felt off. The person was facing away from the road, standing perfectly still. They didn't move, didn't turn to look at me, just stood there, like they were waiting for something. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of their clothes, dirty, torn, almost like they'd been out there for days. But what really made my skin crawl was the fact that there were no cars, no signs of a wreck, nothing to explain how they got there. Just a lone figure standing in the middle of nowhere. I kept driving, shaking off the unease. People do weird things sometimes. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were just some drifter with nowhere to go. But about 10 minutes later, I saw another figure, same position, standing on the side of the road, facing away, completely motionless. My hands tightened on the wheel. It couldn't be the same person. I'd been going at least 60, and there were no side roads or turns where someone could have cut ahead, but they looked exactly the same. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, but when I passed the third one, I knew something was wrong. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look directly at them. But the worst part. In my side mirror, I saw the third figure move. Not just a little. They turned their head just enough to show a sliver of a pale face. A chill ran down my spine. I focused on driving, pushing the truck a little faster. I wasn't about to stop, wasn't about to let whatever this was get any closer. Another 5 minutes passed, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Ahead of me, the road was completely blocked, not by cars, but by more figures. A dozen of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the highway, all facing away. I slammed the brakes, my truck skidding slightly before coming to a stop. The engine rumbled, the headlights casting long shadows over the motionless figures. And then, one by one, they started to turn. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into reverse, my heart pounding as I backed up, nearly swerving off the road. My headlights briefly caught something. Faces, pale and expressionless, eyes completely black. I swung the wheel hard, turning the truck onto the rocky shoulder and gunning it forward, kicking up dust and gravel as I veered around the figures and back onto the road. I didn't look back. I just drove fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the next town. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking. I tried to make sense of it, tried to come up with some logical explanation. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I know that's not true. Because when I checked my truck's dash cam the next morning, the footage cut out completely, right before I reached them. I've always loved foggy nights. There's something calming about watching the thick mist roll in, swallowing everything in its path. My 8-year-old son, Ryan, shares that fascination. Whenever the fog gets heavy, we sit on the front porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the world disappear before our eyes. This happened on a chilly October night. The fog was so thick you could barely see past the porch steps. Ryan and I sat outside with mugs of hot chocolate, listening to the distant sound of crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. Ryan was the first to notice something was off. "Dad," he whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "There's someone out there." I followed his gaze into the fog, but I couldn't see anything. "Where?" He pointed toward the street where the fog was densest. They were standing there, just watching. I squinted, but all I saw was shifting mist. "It's probably just a shadow," I assured him, though something about the way he said it made me uneasy. We sat there for a while longer, but Ryan didn't take his eyes off that spot. Eventually, I convinced him to head inside. I locked the front door behind us, just in case. Later that night, I was in the living room watching TV when I heard a soft tap on the window. My stomach tightened. I turned the volume down and listened. Nothing. I walked over to the window, slowly pulling the curtain aside. For a moment, all I saw was my own reflection against the glass. Then, as another streetlight flickered, I saw it. A figure, standing on the sidewalk, facing the house. It was motionless, too still. I felt my breath catch. The fog swirled around it, making it hard to tell if it was a man or something else. I stepped back from the window and checked the locks on the door. Everything was secure. Maybe it was just someone passing through. But if that were the case, why were they standing so still and staring? I hurried to check on Ryan. He was fast asleep, unaware of what I had just seen. I didn't want to wake him, so I quietly left his room, deciding to keep an eye on things from the living room. Hours passed. The fog was still thick, but the figure was gone. I felt a strange sense of relief, though it didn't last long. Just as I was about to turn off the lights and head to bed, Ryan's scream pierced through the house. I ran to his room, my heart pounding. He was sitting up in bed, shaking, his eyes wide with fear. "He's at my window," he stammered. I spun around, staring at the window above his bed. The fog made it hard to see, but as another streetlight flickered, I saw movement, a shadow shifting right outside. Without thinking, I yanked the blinds shut and grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a fireplace poker from the hallway. I stormed outside, adrenaline drowning out my fear. The porch light cast a dim glow, barely cutting through the fog. I scanned the yard, the sidewalk, even the driveway. Nothing. But then, just as I was about to go back inside, I heard it. A whisper, too faint to make out, coming from the fog. I didn't wait to hear more. I locked every door, every window. That night, Ryan slept in my bed. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, the fog had lifted and everything looked normal, but I knew what I saw, and so did Ryan. Whoever or whatever was out there, they never made a sound, and that was the part that scared me the most. I'm a 25-year-old guy, and a couple of years ago, I worked for a food delivery service while finishing up college. It was an easy way to make money, and I liked that I didn't have to make small talk with passengers like an Uber driver would. Most of my deliveries were to college students, ordering late-night food, so I usually worked between 7 p.m. and 2 a.m. One Friday night, around 11:30 p.m., I got an order to deliver to a house about 10 minutes away from a main road. The name on the order was just M, which was weird, but people used initials sometimes. When I arrived at the location, the house looked off. It wasn't run down or abandoned, but there were no lights on inside or out, no cars in the driveway. The whole area felt too quiet. I pulled into the driveway and sent a message through the app letting them know I had arrived. No response. After waiting a minute, I decided to just get out and drop the food at the door. As I stepped out, I heard a soft, distant noise, like something moving in the trees behind the house. I tried to ignore it and walked up to the porch. That's when I noticed the front door. It was slightly open, just enough to see inside. I froze. The air felt heavy, like something was watching me. I placed the bag on the ground, took a quick picture for proof, and turned to leave. But before I reached my car, a voice whispered from the darkness, "You forgot the drink." My whole body tensed. I hadn't seen or heard anyone come to the door. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance back. The door was open wider now, and in the darkness, I could see the shape of someone standing just inside. They weren't moving. They weren't reaching for the food. They were just standing there, too still, barely even breathing. I slowly backed toward my car, pretending I hadn't noticed them. It's in the bag," I said quickly, fumbling for my door handle. The person didn't respond, just stood there, barely visible in the dark. I got in, locked my doors, and put the car in reverse. As my headlights swept across the front yard, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were footprints in the dirt leading from the trees, but they didn't go to the house. They went to my car. Before I could react, something slammed against my back window. A face, wide eyes, a twisted grin. I hit the gas. My tires screeched as I flew backward out of the driveway. I barely looked back as I sped off, my hands shaking. I reported the delivery as undeliverable and contacted support, but the number listed on the account was disconnected. A couple of days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up the address. The house had been vacant for months. No one was supposed to be living there. I don't know who I saw that night, but I never worked late-night shifts again. It was a late night at work, and by the time I finally left the office, it was almost midnight. The weather had taken a nasty turn, strong winds, heavy rain, and occasional flashes of lightning cutting across the sky. My car, an old 2007 Honda Civic, wasn't exactly built for this kind of weather, but I just wanted to get home. The drive was eerie. The roads were nearly empty, and the rain was relentless, hammering against my windshield so hard that even with my wipers on full blast, visibility was awful. I had to slow down to 40 miles per hour, gripping the wheel tightly as my headlights barely cut through the downpour. Then, just as I was passing a stretch of dense forest, I saw movement. A figure dressed in soaked, dark clothing darted across the road right in front of my car. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I slammed on the brakes, yanking the wheel to avoid hitting them. but my tires lost traction on the wet pavement. My car spun out of control, skidding off the road and slamming sideways into a ditch. The impact rattled me. My head hit the side window, and for a moment I just sat there, dazed. The engine sputtered before shutting off, leaving me in complete silence except for the sound of rain pounding against the roof. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the shock, then turned my attention back to the road. The person who had run across, where were they? I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. First I tried my brother. No answer. Then my sister. Nothing. My last option was my dad. After several rings, he finally picked up, his groggy voice filled with concern as I quickly explained what had happened. He told me he was on his way and to stay inside the car, keeping the doors locked. I followed his advice, locking every door before nervously scanning my surroundings. The forest was nothing but a black void beyond my headlights, and the rain made it impossible to see anything clearly. I tried to shake the feeling that someone, whoever had run into the road, was still out there. Minutes passed. My dad hadn't arrived yet, and the uneasy silence inside my car felt suffocating. Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed something move. I turned my head sharply to the left, toward the driver's side window. A pale, drenched face was staring at me. I screamed, jerking away from the window as my heart slammed against my ribs. The person, soaking wet with wide, unblinking eyes, just stood there, watching me. Their mouth was slightly open, like they were about to speak but never did. Then slowly they lifted a hand and pressed their fingers against the glass. I fumbled for my phone, dialing my dad in a panic. The call barely connected before the person outside suddenly grinned, a twisted, unnatural smile that made my stomach churn. And then they started knocking, soft at first, then harder, harder. The entire car shook as they pounded their fists against the door. I was hyperventilating, trying to scream at them to go away, but my voice barely worked. Then, just when I thought the window would shatter, headlights appeared from down the road. My dad's truck. The figure outside twitched at the sight of the approaching vehicle, then without hesitation, turned and sprinted back into the woods. I barely saw the dark shape disappearing between the trees before my dad pulled up behind me. I practically threw myself out of the car the moment he stepped out. He grabbed me by the shoulders, looking me over, asking if I was hurt, but all I could do was point toward the forest, my breath still shaky. There was someone here, I gasped. They were watching me. My dad narrowed his eyes and grabbed a flashlight from his truck. He shined it into the trees, sweeping the beam across the drenched leaves and mud, but there was nothing, no movement, no sign that anyone had been there at all, but I know what I saw. And before we left, as the tow truck arrived, I noticed something on the driver's side window. 5 smudged fingerprints streaked across the glass, like someone had been pressing their hand against it, and then slowly dragged it down. The town I live in almost never gets fog, so when it does, it feels like the world is wrapped in something unnatural. People slow down, headlights cut through the mist like knives, and everything seems eerily quiet. Last week, a thick fog rolled in late at night, while my friends and I were on a voice call, playing some game together. I don't remember which game. It doesn't matter now. I first noticed the fog when my window became a pale, glowing blur. It wasn't normal mist. It was too thick, too absolute. I mentioned it to my friends, and one of them joked that it looked like Silent Hill outside. We laughed, but something about it unsettled me. I got up, walked to my window, and tried to see past the glow of the streetlights. That's when I saw him, a figure, standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't moving, just there, a tall, lanky silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, no face, no details, just an outline swallowed by the fog. I stared for a few seconds, frozen. Then, as if he could hear my thoughts, he turned and walked down the street, fading into the mist. I told myself it was just someone passing through, maybe a neighbor. Still, my hands were cold when I sat back down. I put my headset on and tried to focus on the game, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that figure. Maybe 15 minutes passed. My room was silent except for the faint chatter of my friends through my headset. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not at my door, at my window. A cold wave passed through me. My room is on the 2nd floor. I turned my head, heart pounding. The fog outside was even thicker now, but through it, I saw something, a shape pressed against the glass. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I ripped my headset off and bolted out of my room. My house was quiet, too quiet. I checked on my little brother, still asleep. My parents' door was shut. I felt like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I went back to my room, double-checked the lock on my window, and sat in bed staring at the blinds. I didn't sleep. Hours passed. The fog stayed. Then my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "You saw me." I nearly dropped the phone. My mouth was dry. I wanted to convince myself it was a prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I didn't reply. I didn't move. I just sat there. At some point, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the fog had finally cleared. Sunlight spilled through my blinds. Everything felt normal until I saw it. A single handprint-shaped smudge on my window, right where the figure had been, and taped below it, a note with just 3 words. "You see me." I haven't slept properly since. And every time the fog rolls in, I don't look outside. I don't want to know if he's there, because I think, deep down, I already know he is. I work as a babysitter for a family with 2 kids. Their dad passed away a few years ago, so their mom works late to support them. She's a nurse and often pulls night shifts, which means I stay over sometimes. One Friday night, she had an overnight shift, so I put the kids to bed around 8:30. It was fall, meaning the sun had set hours ago. The house was in a quiet wooded neighborhood, no streetlights, just long winding roads surrounded by trees. It was peaceful but eerie at night. Around 10 p.m., I was in the living room watching TV when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I noticed a shadow move past the window. It was quick, but I saw it. Someone was out there. I got up slowly and checked the front door. It was locked. I went to the kitchen door, also locked. I was about to check the back door when I heard the doorknob rattle. My heart stopped. Someone was trying to get in. I ran to the kids' room as quietly as I could. They were still asleep. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, there was a knock on the window. Not the front door, the window. I froze. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a hood, and standing just outside the window, looking in. He didn't move, didn't say anything. He just stared. My hands were shaking as I backed away, trying not to make a sound. Then he smiled. I grabbed the house phone and called 911. I whispered what was happening. The operator told me to stay quiet and keep the kids inside. As I was talking, I heard footsteps moving toward the back of the house. Then, the sound of the back door handle twisting. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and locked the bedroom door. The kids were still asleep, oblivious to the danger outside. I heard a soft tap on the window again, and then a voice. "You don't remember me, do you?" I felt sick. My brain raced. Who was this? Then I heard him laugh, a slow, deliberate chuckle. I couldn't take it anymore. I whispered into the phone, "Please, please hurry." And then, silence. No footsteps. No knocking. Just the sound of my own breathing. Minutes felt like hours. I stayed by the door, gripping the knife, barely breathing. Then, flashing red and blue lights flooded the windows. The police arrived. They found no one, but they did find something else. Footprints, leading from the woods to the house, then back into the trees. The officers searched the area, but found nothing. They told me to keep the doors locked and stay put for the night. They left a patrol car nearby, just in case. The kids never woke up. They never knew how close we came to something terrible. The next day, their mom came home. When I told her what happened, she went pale. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through some photos, and showed me a picture. Was this him? My stomach dropped. It was the same man. Her ex-brother-in-law, the one who blamed her for his brother's death, the one who swore she'd pay for ruining his family, the one who had been in prison until last month. I never babysat for them again. I was 23 and juggling college with a part-time job at my parents' little diner on the edge of town. We served a modest menu, mostly takeout orders, and on slow nights, the place felt almost empty. A perfect backdrop for quiet reflection, or so I thought. With finals looming, I had agreed to cover mostly the late shifts, arriving after dinner service to clean up and lock the doors. It was mid-January, the kind of night when the chill in the air makes every shadow seem more ominous. About an hour into my shift one night, while wiping down the front windows, I noticed a dark, matte black SUV parked in the far corner of our tiny lot. Our diner stood alone on a quiet street, so it was unusual for anyone to pull up unless they were a regular customer. The SUV's windows were heavily tinted, and its engine hummed softly, as if it were idling on purpose. I tried to brush off the uneasy feeling, thinking maybe someone had just parked temporarily and forgotten to move on. But 2 nights later, as I was finishing up cleaning, the same SUV rolled in. This time, it glided slowly to a stop right behind the diner, its presence too deliberate to be a mere coincidence. I peeked out from behind the counter, a little faster than usual. The vehicle's low profile and silent approach made it seem like it was waiting for someone. I double-checked the lock on the front door before turning my attention back to my tasks, though I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. That third night, I arrived at the diner with an unshakable anxiety. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, heightened my senses as I methodically cleaned tables and swept the floors. For nearly 3 hours, I kept sneaking glances out of the window, half expecting the SUV to appear again. When I finally finished and was about to lock up, I felt an inexplicable chill. I stepped outside into the quiet parking lot, the only sound my own footsteps on the cracked pavement. The street lamps cast long, eerie shadows, and just as I reached the midpoint between the diner and my car, I saw it, a pair of dim headlights emerging from the darkness at the far side of the lot. The SUV was there again, parked in a poorly lit corner away from the comforting glow of the streetlights. In that moment, my instinct screamed to run. Before I could decide what to do, the SUV's engine roared, and it began moving slowly toward me. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my car keys in my pocket. I was only a few feet from my car when the vehicle suddenly halted beside me with a screech of brakes. In the blink of an eye, the passenger door swung open. I didn't have time to process the shock. I just sprinted for my car. As I clambered into my vehicle, I heard the sound of footsteps thudding on the gravel. I glanced in my rear-view mirror and caught a glimpse of 3 figures emerging from the shadows, all dressed in dark clothing with their faces obscured by scarves and hoods. They moved with a purpose, closing the distance between us with every passing second. My trembling hands barely managed to start the engine, and I jerked the car into drive, the tires squealing as I tore out of the lot. The figures' shouts and the sound of pounding footsteps faded behind me as I merged onto the main road. I drove in a blur until I reached a well-lit 24-hour gas station. The bright artificial light offered a temporary sense of safety from the darkness that had nearly swallowed me whole. I pulled into a parking spot and immediately dialed 911 as I recounted everything. The SUV, its deliberate appearances, and those masked figures chasing me under the cold night. When the police arrived a short while later, they combed the area and took my statement, but there was little to go on. No security cameras from our diner had caught any clear images, and the SUV had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The officers could only speculate about what had happened, leaving me with more questions than answers. To this day, I started to avoid the later shifts at the diner, fearing that the SUV or those figures might return. And though I've never seen that SUV or those shadowy figures again, I remain cautious and alert. This all started a few years back when I took a night job at a small 24-hour convenience store called Moonlight Mart. It was a modest little shop tucked away on a quiet side street, the kind of place that rarely saw more than a handful of customers during the witching hours. I'd always preferred the solitude of the night shift, where the silence and the soft hum of refrigerators provided a comforting background. I even lived only a few blocks away, so my walk to and from work was both short and familiar. I remember one chilly autumn night, around 2 a.m., when everything felt especially still. I was behind the counter, idly rearranging some impulse-buy items, when I noticed a woman entering the store. She didn't look like a regular customer. There was something almost ethereal about her. She was in her late 30s, with jet black hair that fell in loose waves around her pale face. Dressed in a long, dark coat despite the moderate temperature, she moved with an odd, deliberate grace. After a polite good evening exchanged between us, she drifted off toward the cereal aisle. I couldn't help but notice that her eyes seemed to linger on me a little too long. At first, I assumed she was just lost in thought, but after a few minutes, while I was restocking the counter, I caught sight of her standing partly hidden between the shelves. Clutched in her hand was a small, outdated camcorder, one of those models you'd expect to find in an old thrift store. It looked as if she were recording everything around her, and occasionally, she'd angle it in my direction. I felt a sudden prickling on the back of my neck. The way she held the device, almost reverently, was unsettling. I tried to focus on my tasks, telling myself that maybe she was just an eccentric local blogger. After a few minutes, she seemed to lose interest. I saw her slip behind another aisle, the camcorder clattering softly as she set it aside on a shelf. I let it go, shrugging off the unease. After all, it was just a quiet night, and peculiar behavior wasn't unheard of in a place like this. Time passed and more customers trickled in, mostly late-night wanderers and the occasional insomniac. I barely gave the incident another thought until my shift ended. I locked up, stepped out into the cool darkness, and started the short walk home. The streets were empty, the only sound being the occasional distant hum of a car engine. Yet as I walked, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that someone was watching me. At first, I noticed soft footsteps echoing behind me, but they always seemed too far away to belong to anyone following closely. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder every so often. That's when I saw her again, the same woman, now standing on the opposite sidewalk. She didn't say a word. Instead, she raised the camcorder, as if to document my every move. I crossed the street, determined to put as much distance as possible between us. The pursuit felt almost ritualistic. No matter which block I turned, there she was, always a few steps behind, always silent, always recording. By the time I reached the steps of my apartment building, relief washed over me briefly. The building's secure entrance and the heavy door locks gave me a small sense of safety. I fumbled with my keys, anxious to get inside and away from prying eyes. Once inside, I bolted the door and exhaled deeply. Yet sleep did not come easily that night. I kept thinking of the woman's unnerving presence, the persistent clicking of her camcorder's record button echoing in my mind. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep, though the dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and the sound of distant, relentless tapping. The following evening, while I was half awake during a lull in my shift, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible tapping at the back door of the store. My pulse quickened. I crept over to the door and peered through the peephole. For a split second, I thought I saw her, pale, with her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, disappearing into the night. When I looked again, she was gone. I reported the incident to my supervisor the next morning, but nothing concrete ever came of it. The police were notified after I described what I'd experienced on my walk home, yet they couldn't find any trace of her footprints or any evidence that she had ever been there at all. It was as if she was nothing more than a figment of my overactive imagination, or a ghostly reminder that not all watchers have good intentions. I eventually left Moonlight marked and even moved away from the neighborhood. Years ago, I worked at a 24-hour diner just outside of town. It was one of those places that had been around forever, where truckers, night owls, and the occasional lost traveler would stop in at all hours. The overnight shifts were the worst. Barely any customers, terrible tips, and a lingering unease that never quite went away. I always felt like I was being watched, even when the place was empty. The parking lot lights flickered, the old jukebox sometimes played on its own, and the back storage room always felt colder than it should have been. I hated working alone, so I started asking my friend Matt to come hang out with me. He was one of those guys who never slept and was always up for late-night company. He'd sit at the counter with his laptop, sipping on free coffee while I cleaned and waited for the occasional customer. It made those long, eerie nights a little easier to bear. One Friday night, Matt didn't show. He had texted earlier, saying he'd tried to swing by, but midnight rolled around and I was still alone. Around 2 a.m., I stepped out back for a quick break. The air was thick, heavy, like a storm was coming. When I turned to go back inside, I hesitated. The door was cracked open. I was sure I had closed it behind me. As I stepped inside, glancing around, nothing seemed out of place, but something felt wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid and went back behind the counter to wipe things down. A few minutes later, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, ready to greet whoever walked in, but no one was there. That's when I noticed it. The bathroom door. It was closed, and the light was on. I knew for a fact that I hadn't seen it like that earlier. The diner had been empty for hours. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a metal coffee pot, and slowly walked over. I knocked. Hello, but no answer. I swallowed hard and knocked again. Still nothing. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the air was thick with the scent of something metallic. That's when I saw it. The mirror above the sink was smeared with something dark, thick. Words, scrawled in uneven strokes, I see you. My blood ran cold. A noise behind me, a soft creak. I spun around, expecting someone to be standing there, but there was nothing. Just the empty diner, my own reflection in the mirror. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and bolted for the door. As I fumbled with the lock, the bell above the entrance jingled again. The hair on my arms stood on end. I turned just for a second, and I saw him, Matthew, standing by the counter, staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes were wrong, too wide. His mouth curled into a grin that wasn't his. "Where are you going?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He took a step forward, then another. That's when I noticed his shoes. They were wet. I ran. I don't remember unlocking my car. I don't remember starting the engine. I only remember peeling out of that parking lot, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Matt's number was disconnected the next day. He never answered my texts. He never showed up again. I quit the diner a week later. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't think I ever want to find out.
A little over 3 years ago, I took a job I never expected to have, a night security position at a renovated historic warehouse on the outskirts of town. A friend of mine, Dan, had recommended the gig, saying it was quiet and nothing to worry about. At the time, I was struggling to make ends meet and didn't mind the solitude that came with a midnight shift. I soon learned that quiet sometimes hides the most unsettling secrets. My first night on duty was uneventful enough. The warehouse, now partly converted into a community art space and partly left abandoned, had been outfitted with modern security cameras and a small, glass-enclosed control booth. The large windows overlooked a narrow, poorly lit driveway. I spent the early hours reviewing feeds of the empty lot and echoing corridors, the only sounds being the hum of machinery and the occasional creak from the old building settling into the night. At roughly 1:20 a.m., while scanning a feed from the main entrance, I noticed a figure moving in the periphery. A tall man wearing a dark, threadbare coat and a battered fedora that shadowed most of his face. His gait was measured, almost rehearsed, as if he were following a predetermined path. I leaned forward and tried to focus the camera, but the low light rendered his features indistinct. "Security to main entrance," I announced over the intercom in a cautious tone. There was no immediate response, just a moment of static and the distant rustle of wind through dead branches. I kept watching as the man slowly approached the glass door. The door, designed to slide open automatically with motion, swung open with a soft whoosh, and the man stepped inside. I switched to the interior camera. The lobby was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, and a thin layer of dust covered the old mosaic floor. The man walked confidently across the space, his eyes occasionally darting toward the corridor as if he were searching for something or someone. Gathering my nerve, I greeted him through the speaker. "Good evening. How can I help you?" In response, the man paused, turning slowly to face the camera. His voice was low and deliberate. "I'm looking for Suite 12. I seem to have misplaced my access pass." There was something off about his tone, a mix of urgency and calm that sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. I hesitated, as I recalled that the building's new section was strictly for scheduled guests and events. A quick check in the digital log confirmed there was no reservation under his name for Suite 12. "Suite 12 is currently unoccupied," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "May I ask for some identification?" He smirked, the corners of his lips curling in a way that made my skin crawl. "I know what I need. Just allow me in," he insisted. I felt the weight of the building's strict security protocols pressing down on me, but something in his expression told me this wasn't a normal inquiry. I pressed the intercom button again. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't grant access without proper verification. Please wait in the lobby." After a tense silence, I heard his heavy footsteps echo away toward a side hallway. Relieved yet still unnerved, I returned to monitoring the cameras, only to find that the man had reappeared in a different part of the building. This time, he was near a long corridor lined with old ornate mirrors that had survived the renovation. In one of the reflections, I distinctly saw not just the man, but another shadowy figure standing directly behind him, a gaunt, almost translucent presence that vanished when I quickly shifted my gaze. My heart pounded as I reached for my cell phone to call Dan for advice, but the call went straight to voicemail. I could almost hear my own breathing echoing in the silence of the booth. The security system, which I assumed was foolproof, suddenly began glitching. Cameras flickered, and digital displays froze intermittently. I tried to maintain control of the situation, reminding myself that it was probably just a technical hiccup. Before I could regain composure, I heard muffled voices and the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the corridor outside the control booth. The intercom crackled to life with a distorted, low command, "Let me in now." My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock controls. I could hear the man's measured steps growing nearer, his voice morphing into an unintelligible murmur punctuated by sharp, almost animalistic hisses. I bolted the security door as best as I could, feeling trapped in a slowly closing cage. Every shadow on the walls seemed to twitch and move, as if imbued with a life of its own. Desperation surged through me. I had to get help. I dialed 911, my voice barely above a whisper, as I described the bizarre intruder and the malfunctioning security system. The dispatcher's calm tone did little to ease my mounting fear, and I was told that officers would be dispatched immediately. Minutes, or perhaps it was hours, stretched by as I sat locked inside the booth. I could still hear footsteps pacing outside, and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of that unnerving figure through a small viewing window. His eyes, when illuminated by the flickering lights, seemed almost to glow with a predatory intensity. At one point, I even heard him softly whisper, "You can't hide forever," as if speaking directly to me. Eventually, the sound of approaching sirens shattered the oppressive silence. I unlocked the booth and rushed out into the lobby, where 2 officers were already methodically sweeping the area. I described the intruder, the glitching cameras, and even mentioned the bizarre figure in the mirror. The officers exchanged skeptical looks but promised to investigate every corner of the building. After a thorough search, they found no trace of the man or the strange apparition that had haunted my night. Only a few scattered items, oddly arranged near the old mirror, remained as evidence of his presence. One officer quietly mentioned that there had been local legends about the warehouse being a nexus for unexplained phenomena. But I wasn't ready to entertain ghost stories. The incident left me shaken to my core. I resigned from the job shortly afterward, unable to shake the feeling that something unnatural had crossed the threshold of that building. I learned that sometimes the rules and protocols meant to protect us fail when confronted with forces beyond our understanding. I've spent nearly 15 years patrolling the quiet grounds of an old industrial complex on the edge of town. Most nights, my shift passed without incident, just routine checks, locked gates, and the occasional stray animal rummaging through discarded boxes. I'd grown accustomed to the solitude and the creaks of metal under the cool night air, confident in my ability to handle whatever might come my way. But one bitter autumn night, everything changed. The property was a maze of abandoned warehouses and unused loading docks, all relics of a time when the complex thrived. Now, under a thin crescent moon, the sprawling site lay silent, except for the whisper of the wind. As I made my usual rounds, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, I took note of every rusted bolt and every echoing footstep of my own. It was a routine check until I reached the far side of the compound, a row of chain-link fences bordering a derelict maintenance building. That's when I noticed it. One section of the fence was slightly askew, the metal links twisted as if someone had pried them open. I paused, my skin prickling despite the chilly air. The damage was fresh, the rust along the torn edge glistening under my beam. I jotted down the anomaly in my log, attributing it to local kids or vandals at first, though a sense of unease crept in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About an hour later, as I strolled past a stack of dusty shipping containers near the old boiler room, I caught a glimpse of movement. At first, it was just a flicker of a dark silhouette darting between containers. I called out firmly, "This area is off limits. Identify yourself." But the figure made no sound, only a slow, deliberate shift into the shadows. I edged closer, my heart pounding until the light of my flashlight revealed nothing but empty space and scattered debris. Perplexed, I bent down near where the figure had vanished. There, half buried in damp leaves, lay a battered flashlight, one that wasn't mine, and a pair of heavy-duty pliers that looked far too robust for any casual repair job. The pliers' steel was cold and slick with oil, a stark contrast to the worn plastic of the flashlight. I radioed in the discovery, my voice steady despite the churning in my chest. The supervisor on the other end advised caution and instructed me to keep watch for any further disturbances. For the remainder of the shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every creak of metal, every gust of wind through the broken windows of the warehouses made me spin around in the dark. When my shift ended, I locked up the main building and reluctantly headed to the guard's booth, all the while wondering if I'd caught only a glimpse of a prowler or something far more sinister. The following nights, things began to escalate. Tools from the storage shed started disappearing. Wrenches, hammers, even a length of crowbar. I'd find traces of activity too. Muddy footprints near the loading docks. A trail of discarded cigarette butts leading to an unused service door. One particularly foggy night, while making my rounds near the central office building, I saw what I can only describe as a shadow flitting across the glass windows. I paused in my tracks and listened for any sounds, but aside from my own heavy breathing, the silence was absolute. On the fourth night, around 2:30 a.m., I decided I had to take matters into my own hands. I set up a discreet motion sensor by the rusted service door, a place where I had repeatedly seen evidence of tampering, and positioned myself in a concealed alcove behind a stack of old pallets. I kept my flashlight low, barely illuminating my surroundings, trying to become part of the darkness. The sensor's quiet beep suddenly shattered the silence. I edged forward, each step measured and silent, until I reached the doorway. There, illuminated by the narrow beam of my flashlight, stood the same dark figure I'd seen before. This time, the intruder was crouched next to an open tool locker, as if searching for something. I didn't shout immediately. Instead, I advanced slowly, my hand hovering near the holster of my pepper spray. Freeze. I managed to hiss, flipping on my flashlight in one swift motion. The figure jerked upright, startled, and for a split second, our eyes locked. In that moment, I saw nothing but a void of malice and desperation behind the shadow of a worn hoodie. Before I could get a clear look at their face, the intruder bolted, vanishing into the maze of containers and abandoned structures. I gave chase for a few desperate minutes, but the sprawling property swallowed them up. All that remained was a small, rusted key left behind on the cold concrete, glinting oddly under the harsh light. I immediately contacted the police. They arrived swiftly, combing the area with searchlights that cut through the darkness. Despite their thorough search, they only found the key and no trace of the mysterious trespasser. The officers took the key as evidence and promised to increase patrols in the area, but the unease that had settled in my chest was far from lifted. In the days that followed, my nights grew even more restless. With the discovery of the intruder's items and the bizarre incidents on the property, my supervisor decided to upgrade security. Surveillance cameras were installed at key points along the perimeter, and an extra guard was scheduled for the midnight shift. Still, every night I'd lie awake, the memory of that cold stare haunting me, the image of those gloved hands rifling through the locker imprinted in my mind. Now, every shift feels different. I've learned that even the most familiar ground can hide unspeakable secrets in its dark corners. Each creak of metal and distant sound is a reminder that something is out there, lurking just beyond the edge of my light. Whether it's a petty thief, a desperate soul, or something far more malevolent, I'll never again take the night for granted. I keep my flashlight at the ready, my eyes scanning every shadow, because the darkness on this property isn't empty. It's alive with secrets and silent watchers, waiting for the next slip in vigilance. And as the nights grow longer and the autumn chill deepens, I can't help but wonder if the intruder will return, or if he was merely the harbinger of something even more unsettling. One thing is certain, I will always be watching, and the night will never feel as safe as it once did. I still remember my first part-time gig, delivering pizzas for a rundown local joint back in 2012. It was the kind of job that paid decently for fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled nights. And on one particular foggy Friday, I was about to learn that some deliveries were best left undisturbed. That night, the pizzeria was nearly empty except for the two of us on delivery duty, and our manager, a no-nonsense sort with a penchant for punctuality, stressed that every minute counted before closing. Our next order came through from an address on the far side of town, a sprawling, decrepit house on a narrow, poorly lit road, flanked by gnarled trees. The order itself was simple enough: a large meat lover's pizza, paired with a side of garlic knots. I knew longer trips usually meant heftier tips, so despite my unease, I set off without hesitation. After a winding drive through unfamiliar streets, I finally pulled up in front of the dilapidated house. Its paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown, and a rusted chain-link fence barely held back nature's reclaiming grip. Before I even stepped out of my car, something caught my eye. In a broken, grimy window near the second floor, I thought I saw a fleeting glimpse of a face, a pair of eyes half hidden in the dark, watching me. Trying to shake off the sudden chill, I stepped out with the pizza bag tucked under my arm. The front door was slightly ajar, and as I approached it, I noticed a crumpled note stuck to the doorframe in hurried, almost desperate handwriting. It read, "Latch broken. Please slip inside quietly. Money on the counter. Do not knock." My heart pounded as I considered the implications. The note was bizarre, almost as if its author expected unwanted company. I hesitated for a split second before pushing the door open. It creaked loudly in the oppressive silence that greeted me. Inside, darkness swallowed every detail, until I fumbled for my phone and switched on its flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow hallway lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and a thin layer of dust on the creaking wooden floor. I moved cautiously, every footstep echoing through the empty space. There was no sign of life, no warmth, just the persistent feeling that something unseen lurked just out of sight. I followed the narrow corridor to what I presumed was a small dining area, where an old wooden table sat beneath a single, flickering overhead light. There, neatly arranged as promised by the note, was a modest stack of cash. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Something about the whole situation felt off, as if the promise of easy money came at a hidden price. Before I could even pocket the money, I thought I heard a soft shuffle from the far corner of the room. I spun around, my light darting over shadows and half-forgotten furniture, when suddenly I caught sight of a dark silhouette standing motionless near a closed door. For a heartbeat, I could make out a pair of hollow eyes fixed on me, as if the figure was silently appraising my intrusion. The stillness of the moment was shattered by the pounding of my own heart, and instinct took over. Grabbing the pizza bag and the cash, I bolted toward the exit. I didn't pause to look back as I slammed the door behind me, racing back to my car with a single desperate thought: get out. The drive away was a blur, but every so often a nagging sensation told me I wasn't truly alone. It felt as though unseen eyes were tracking my escape, following every turn of the road. That night, safe in my apartment, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind brought the memory of that eerie delivery flooding back. I never did figure out who, or what, had left that frantic note, or whether the silent watcher in the darkness was human at all. One thing was clear: sometimes the most routine jobs can lead you straight into the kind of nightmare you'd only ever expect to see in movies. I've never dared venture back to that part of town, and every time I see a delivery bag or hear the chime of my phone, I'm reminded of that unsettling night. A reminder that not all money is worth the risk, and that sometimes it's best to leave mysteries in the dark.
This happened in 2013. I had graduated from college the year before with a degree in education. My goal was to become a teacher, and I was lucky enough to land a job at a high school in a quiet town in Illinois. For the first few weeks, I had to shadow another teacher. It was meant to help me prepare to run my own class, but honestly, it felt more like being a glorified teaching assistant. I mostly sat in on lessons and helped out when needed. That day, I was in a chemistry class, and during a lab session, we needed a set of flasks for the experiment. All the lab equipment was stored in a supply closet at the far end of the building. I volunteered to go grab them. It was only a short walk, maybe a couple of minutes, and I reached the supply room without issue. As I started looking through the shelves, my phone buzzed. It was an automatic text from the school. Being part of the staff, I was required to sign up for emergency notifications. The message read, "Lockdown in effect. This is not a drill." My stomach dropped. If I tried running back to the classroom, the door would likely already be locked, and I'd be left exposed in the hallway. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned off the light and pulled the supply closet door shut, pressing myself into the cramped space. Seconds later, the alarm blared through the school. The usual classroom noises, students talking, footsteps, even the hum of the overhead lights went silent. Then my phone vibrated again. Remain in lockdown. Suspected armed intruder in the building. Police have been notified. I could feel my pulse pounding. I wasn't safe in here. If someone came looking, there was nowhere to go. Then I heard footsteps. Fast. Running. They stopped right outside the closet door. The doorknob twisted. The door opened. Before I could even react, I found myself face to face with a man. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. I'd never seen him before. "Mind if I hide in here with you?" he asked, breathless. I hesitated. Something felt off. But he looked scared, and I wasn't in a position to argue. I moved aside as much as I could, and he squeezed in. He told me he'd been teaching a class down the hall when the lockdown started. That immediately set off an alarm in my head. Why wasn't he locked in with his students? Before I could ask, my phone vibrated again. "Do not open classroom doors for any reason. Suspect described as older male with a beard." I hadn't gotten a great look at the guy in the dark, but from what I could see, he fit the description. I had no time to think. I just reacted. I shoved the door open and sprinted. I didn't look back. I ran straight to the nearest exit, bursting into the parking lot. My car was at the far end, and I didn't stop until I was inside with the doors locked. Breathing hard, I turned to look back at the building. Nothing. No one had followed me. 25 minutes later, I got a final message. Lockdown lifted. Police have cleared the building. Later, I learned how the man had gotten in. He had convinced the front office that he was there to pick up his kid. The lockdown was called after someone spotted a gun holster under his jacket. Several teachers reported hearing someone trying to force their doors open. By the time police arrived, he was gone. Security cameras caught glimpses of him, but never a full view of his face. The footage confirmed one thing, though. He was armed. I watched the footage myself, and even though I'll never be 100% sure, I'm almost certain it was him, the man who hid in the closet with me. It was the last period of the day, senior year of high school. I had an off period, so my school days were usually shorter. A couple of my friends, Brandon and Josh, had their schedules set up the same way. Our third friend, Matt, had an off period every other day, but today wasn't one of them. Since it was Friday and the weather was perfect, we were all texting about heading to the lake. Matt said he was planning to sneak out of gym early to come with us, so we were waiting for him near the gym hallway. This hallway was in a quieter part of the school, and the only people passing through were students heading to gym class. Matt texted us that he'd wait until the teacher took attendance, then sneak back to the locker room and meet us. So we waited. He was taking longer than expected. At the end of the hallway, there was a set of exit doors. They weren't meant to be used as an entrance, but suddenly someone pushed through them from outside. Even though it was a warm, sunny day, this guy came in wearing black sweatpants, a zipped-up hoodie with the hood up, and a black backpack. We all went silent as he passed, locking eyes with each of us. His stare was ice cold, unsettling. Brandon stepped up and said, "What? Dude, get lost." The guy stopped mid-step, turned to Brandon, and asked if he had a problem. Josh and I immediately stepped in, telling Brandon to drop it, just over and over, until the guy finally turned and kept walking. We all agreed he seemed off. He looked like he could have been a student, but none of us recognized him. He had patchy facial hair, like he was older, but not by much. A few minutes passed, and we texted Matt, telling him to hurry up. His reply made my stomach drop. "Can't. We're on lockdown." We had no idea. The gym teachers had just announced it, and everyone was hiding in the locker rooms. That's when we noticed the doors leading to the locker room hallway were closed and locked. It hit us instantly. That guy, the one in black. And then, from somewhere down the hall, a loud pop. At first, it sounded like something heavy dropping. A textbook slammed on a desk, maybe. But then, another one. And another. Gunshots. Students started screaming. My pulse exploded as I turned toward the sound. And there he was. The guy in black. Running full speed toward us. We didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Just ran. We pushed through the exit doors he'd come in from and sprinted toward the woods near the school. I looked back, twice. He was chasing us. Not close, but not far enough. He was yelling something. Most of it was garbled, but one sentence was crystal clear. "I'm gonna kill you, Fed." We made it to the trees and dropped to the ground, pressing ourselves into the dirt. My breathing was ragged, my whole body shaking. Then, footsteps, getting louder. I held my breath as I saw him moving through the woods, scanning the area. He kept running, further and further away. The second he was out of sight, we made a break for it, cutting through to the senior parking lot. Between the sprinting and the sheer panic, I don't know how I didn't throw up. I got to my car, and we all piled in. I drove straight to my house. The lake was out of the question now. That night, the news exploded in our school's group chat. One of the new teachers had been shot. Twice. He survived, but for a while, everyone thought he was going to die. No one ever figured out who the guy was, or why he targeted that teacher. As for us, I think he came after us because Brandon antagonized him. Maybe he planned to come back for him, or all of us once the school was on lockdown. But I don't think it would have mattered. Turns out the school was already tipped off about him. A neighbor saw him loitering outside, acting suspicious. This happened about 5 years ago, during my senior year of high school. I was working on a big test for my science class. It was a tough subject for me, but I had studied hard. I got so caught up in it that I completely lost track of time. By the time I realized how long I'd been sitting there, the bell had already rung. I thought about rushing through the last few questions, but I decided to take my time and finish properly. I knew I wouldn't get in trouble for being late to my next class. When I finally turned in my test, my teacher gave me a hall pass, and I headed out. The hallways were completely silent. I walked quickly, trying to get to my next class, when, out of nowhere, an announcement came over the speakers. The school was going into lockdown. I didn't know why, but I knew I didn't want to be stuck in the hallways. I picked up my pace, turning down another hallway. That's when I saw him, a man, standing right in the middle of the hall. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a student. His hair was long and messy, and his clothes looked old and dirty. Something about him instantly sent alarms blaring in my head. But there was no way around him. I had to pass him to get to my class. I froze. He hadn't seen me yet. Slowly I turned and backed away, trying to stay out of sight. The moment I slipped around the corner, I held my breath and listened. Nothing. I didn't hear him moving then. "Hey!" His voice rang out loud and sharp. "I know you're right around the corner." My stomach dropped. I hadn't made a sound. He shouldn't have known I was here. And then, I heard footsteps, getting closer. I took off running. The second I moved, so did he. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me, fast, too fast. My heart was hammering as I turned corner after corner, hoping to see anyone. Any teacher, any student, anyone at all. But the hallways were completely empty. I wasn't fast. He was catching up. I had to get out. I sprinted toward the nearest exit, the west entrance. And that's when I saw him. A police officer. He was right by the door. As soon as the officer saw me running, he looked past me and spotted the man chasing me. The second the officer moved, the man skidded to a stop, then bolted in the other direction. The officer took off after him. A few minutes later, they caught him. The lockdown ended not long after that. To this day, I don't know who he was or how he got inside the school. The teachers never really talked about it, and no one ever explained what happened. Last year, I was a senior in high school during 5th period. I was a teacher's assistant for a science class. I would usually do whatever the teacher asked me to, like grading assignments or cleaning the lab tables. Other times, I would just do my homework or chill. It was a nice break from normal class. On this day, the science class went on a field trip, and I didn't really want to go. So the teacher let me stay back in her room and grade papers I worked for about 20 minutes, and then took a bathroom break. I got back to the room and began to grade more papers, when the phone to the classroom rang. I picked it up. It was a recorded message from the principal sent to all classrooms saying they were going on lockdown as a suspicious male was seen on school grounds. I followed the directions and shut the door, locked it, and turned off all the lights. I was a little nervous being as I was all by myself in the classroom, but I knew the door was locked and I should be okay. I tried to take my mind off by going back to grading papers. I turned on a little lamp on the desk for light. I got through about 3 more papers when I heard a noise come from the back of the classroom. The room was kind of big and had desks with lab tables behind them. I knew my mind was playing tricks on me and I kept working. Then I heard something again. This time I knew it wasn't my imagination. I looked closely around the classroom when I got to the back corner lab table. I saw it. There was a man's shoe and part of his leg that I could barely see. I was frozen and didn't know what to do. I wanted to run for the door, but I didn't know if I could make it and unlock it in time if he chased me. The teacher's desk was kind of far from the door, but I knew I had to risk it. I didn't want to stay in the room with him. I counted to 3 and then got up and calmly walked to the door about 3 steps from the door, and I heard more noise as if the man was getting up at that point. I reached for the door as fast as I could, unlocked it, and opened it. I slammed it shut behind me and ran as fast as I could. Down the hall, I heard the door open behind me. I saw the nearest staircase and ran upstairs, hoping to lose the man if he was following me. I didn't even know if he was chasing me, but I was scared out of my mind. I got upstairs and pounded on the nearest classroom door. The teacher let me in. After about 10 seconds, the man did not follow me upstairs. I got in the room and explained everything as fast as I could to the teacher, who then made a call to inform the principal. It ended up being too late, and the man was able to escape. I figure he snuck in the classroom as I went to the bathroom, and I don't know if he had intentions to harm me or not, but I'm just glad that I'm okay. I went to a high school in Oregon. Lockdown drills were routine, once a month. But only once was it real. It was a normal lunch period. I was sitting with my friend, eating and joking around when the teacher in charge of the cafeteria suddenly grabbed the microphone. "Everyone, be quiet." His voice was different, not the usual tired, annoyed tone. He sounded urgent. The whole cafeteria fell silent. Then he spoke again, and this time there was real panic in his voice. "We are now in lockdown." He didn't explain why. He just repeated that we needed to stay silent. Around me, people exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, but most just sat frozen, listening. Then we heard it. A gunshot. Distant, but unmistakable. A single crack that seemed to freeze time. For half a second, no one moved. Then, chaos. Screams erupted across the cafeteria. People shoved their chairs back. A few ran for the exit doors. The teacher yelled for everyone to get under the tables, and this time, people actually listened. My friend and I ducked under ours, our backs pressed against the cold tile floor. The cafeteria was filled with the sound of hushed sobs, the scraping of chairs as people tried to hide. Every second felt stretched, like time was crawling. Then, from across the room, more screaming. Louder. Closer. I peeked out, and that's when I saw him. A kid, standing outside the locked cafeteria doors, holding a gun. For a moment, he just stood there, looking inside. Then he raised the gun and fired. The first shot cracked against the glass. It didn't shatter right away. Maybe it didn't even break at all. But that was all it took. The cafeteria exploded into chaos. Students sprinted for the side exits, knocking over chairs and trays. Some tripped, got back up, kept running. My friend grabbed my arm and we ran too. I barely remember moving. I just knew I had to get out. Outside, people scattered in every direction. Some ran to their cars, others bolted off school property, vanishing into the surrounding neighborhood. I ran toward the front of the school, toward home. My legs felt weak, but adrenaline kept me moving. By the time I reached the front parking lot, the police were already arriving, their sirens cutting through the panic. But I didn't stop. I just kept running. When I got home, I could barely breathe. I told my parents everything. My dad turned on the news, and it was already being reported. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded, and somehow the police managed to apprehend the shooter without killing him. I went to a small private school where the middle and high school had only about 30 students combined. One of the assistant coaches on my middle school soccer team was a soft-spoken man who often volunteered at school events. I assumed it was because he had 2 adopted sons attending the school, one a grade above me, the other a few grades below. I barely remembered him after middle school. He was just another background figure in my early years. But after I graduated high school, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered out of curiosity. It was him, congratulating me on my graduation. At first, I thought it was just a friendly gesture, but then he called again. This time, he insisted on taking me out for a steak dinner. I tried to politely decline, but he wouldn't let it go. He started texting, then calling repeatedly. It became overwhelming. Something felt off. Eventually, I told him, firmly, to leave me alone. A couple of years passed. I was a sophomore in college when I got an email from him. The subject line was vague, but the message itself was unsettling. "Dear, I shall try one last time, not to bother, but to seek a friendship I feel could benefit us both. Most people pass through life without leaving a mark, forgotten before their time. But some leave an impression. Long ago, as a soccer coach, I met a young man of intrigue. His intelligence shone through his movements on the field. Something about him standing out, something valuable. I have tried to understand why, but all I know is that he left an imprint in my mind. Of course, society frowns upon a grown married man wanting to keep a friendship with a young man, even one that is innocent, respectful. Maybe one day, our paths will cross again. The email went on, long, rambling, listing strange examples of friendships he'd formed. A 19-year-old girl at mortuary school, a 93-year-old woman in a nursing home, a 70-year-old writer he shared glasses of wine with, a young boy who lacked a father figure. Then he ended with, "Perhaps this means nothing to you, or perhaps something, that is for you to decide." That was enough for me. I responded curtly, telling him I had forwarded the email to my father, who, luckily, was an attorney. I never heard from him again, but then my younger sister told me one of her male friends had similar encounters with this man, and that's when it got even stranger. Apparently, he worked as a mortician in the county. I later remembered something else. During the time he was calling me non-stop, he left multiple voicemails a day. Messages like, "I want to take you to a steakhouse. Anything you want. We could even have some wine at my place first. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I think we could really get along." At first I brushed it off as awkward persistence, but after I changed my phone number and email for unrelated reasons, he somehow got my new contact information. That's when he sent the email and started calling again. After I warned him about my father, he finally stopped. Months later, something chilling happened. The county prosecutor contacted me, asking for information about him. Out of curiosity, I searched his name and email online. That's when I found 2 obituaries. Teenage boys, 14 and 15, from completely different states. In both, he had posted messages on the funeral pages. The wording was eerily similar to what he wrote to me. "Parents, may God give you strength. I feel like I knew your son through our Facebook messages and grew to love and respect him deeply. My heart aches. I love you," boy's name. It was speculative, but the fact that he was writing identical messages to grieving families about boys he likely never met sent a shiver down my spine. And what unsettled me the most, I barely knew this man. I was a 6th grader when he was my assistant coach. I rarely even played in games. He wasn't a teacher I saw daily. I didn't leave an impression on him. Yet years later, he acted as if I did. I live with a roommate, and something strange happened not too long ago. We rent a small place not far from downtown. The price is decent, and things have been going pretty smoothly, at least up until this one incident. My roommate's name is Brian. We get along fine, though I wouldn't call us super close. We both work different shifts, so it's normal for us not to see each other for a few days at a time. A couple of months back, I came home from work one evening. It was around 6 p.m. I went straight to the kitchen to grab a drink, and on my way out into the living room, I noticed that the back door was wide open. Not just unlocked, completely open. I walked over and shut it, thinking Brian must have forgotten to close it. Between the two of us, we can both be careless sometimes, but this seemed like something he would do more than me. I closed the door, locked it, and shook my head a little. Then I went upstairs to my room. I was probably up there for about half an hour when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I just assumed it was Brian. I didn't even consider it could be someone else. The person reached the top of the stairs and walked down the hallway. When they passed by my bedroom door, which was shut, I called out, "Brian." No reply. I followed up with, "You left the back door open." Still nothing. That caught me off guard because I knew he heard me. I figured maybe he was in the bathroom, the guest room, or his bedroom. So I opened my door to see what was up. But when I stepped into the hallway, I didn't see Brian. Instead, there was some guy I had never seen before. He was tall and thin, with longer blonde hair and a light reddish beard. As soon as he looked over at me, I turned and took off running. He came after me right away. I didn't think I could get the front or back door open in time. I would have had to unlock it, pull it open, too risky. So, in a quick decision, I ran toward the basement. I know that sounds dumb, but in that moment, it felt like the only option. The basement door was already slightly open, and it was right next to the stairs. The guy was maybe 20 feet behind me at that point. I ran down into the basement without flipping the light on. It was completely dark. The place isn't finished. We just have our washer and dryer down there and some boxes and containers. Nothing else, really. I turned left as soon as I got to the bottom, then moved behind the stairs. That spot felt like my best chance to stay hidden. It was pitch black down there. I could hear the guy coming down the stairs a few seconds later. He didn't say anything. I had no idea what he wanted or what he planned to do. He started moving around the room, slowly, knocking over one of the boxes. He was clearly looking for me, though I couldn't figure out why. At one point, it sounded like he walked further into the basement, away from where I was hiding. I thought about making a run for it, but I stayed where I was. I just couldn't bring myself to move. The space I was in wasn't an obvious spot to look unless you were familiar with the basement layout. He circled the area a bit more, even walked close to where I was, but somehow, he didn't check my spot. He stayed down there for what felt like 10 or 15 minutes. Finally, I heard him go back up the stairs. I wasn't sure what to do. I felt like I had some breathing room now, but I also didn't want to walk into a trap if he was still nearby. Luckily, I had my phone on me. This was actually the first time I thought to call for help. I called 911 and tried to keep my voice as quiet as possible. It was dead silent in that basement, and I didn't want him to hear me. I explained that someone had broken into my house and chased me down into the basement. They told me officers were on the way. I ended the call and stayed completely still. About 10 minutes later, I was starting to feel a little better. But then I heard the basement door open again. The guy walked back down, slowly this time. He only stayed for maybe a minute before turning around and heading back upstairs. I had no clue what he was doing. Then, I heard a knock at the front door. It had to be the police. I heard the guy suddenly run through the house. I came out from behind the stairs and ran back up to let them in. And yeah, it was definitely the police. I yelled out that the guy was leaving through the back door. They chased him down a few blocks away. Turns out Brian had accidentally left the back door unlocked before he left for work. That's how the guy got in. I still don't know what he wanted or why he chased me. All I know is, I don't ever want to see that guy again, and I'm hoping Brian double-checks that door from now on. This happened to me earlier this year. One evening, my partner and I were out on the porch around 9 p.m. We live deep in the countryside near a quiet highway that runs between two main exits. The stars were out, and it was peaceful with just the sound of crickets. We were sitting near the fire when I heard something and told my partner to be quiet so I could listen closely. It was a woman yelling. It didn't sound right. She was calling for help in a way that made it clear something was very wrong. It didn't sound like any usual yelling. I looked at my partner, and we both knew this wasn't just someone messing around. Her voice got louder, which meant she was getting closer to our house. After a bit, we saw someone running along the grassy area between the roads, heading toward the stretch of highway near our property. Our house sits a good bit back from the road down a long driveway, but it's still close enough that we could clearly see the highway. If we could see her, she could also probably see us, especially with our fire lit. The house across from us still had their holiday lights up, which made the road even easier to see. I dropped my cigarette in the fire and quickly went to the doorway to grab my phone and call 911. My partner ran inside past me to grab a jacket and shoes. I told him not to go out there, but he didn't listen and kept getting ready anyway. Just as he was getting dressed, a red car sped up the road and pulled over near the woman. She was still in the grassy median, so there was a ditch between her and the car. A man was driving, but I couldn't make out his face. I could hear him yelling, saying he was going to hurt her and calling her names I won't repeat. He seemed to be tossing things out of the car, maybe her clothes or trash. I couldn't really tell. As soon as she saw the car, she started running directly toward our yard. By then, I was already on the phone with emergency services, but since we're a good distance from town, I knew it would take a bit for them to arrive. My partner had finished putting on his shoes and jacket and ran out to meet her. He asked if she was all right. She said she had gotten a ride from that man, but partway through the drive he started acting strange. He wouldn't let her out of the car when she asked, and She said at one point she looked into the back seat and saw a roll of duct tape. That scared her, so when she had the chance, she jumped out of the car while it was still moving and just started running and yelling for help. My partner brought her inside, and we called the police again to share what we had just learned. They told us to stay on the line until someone arrived. Inside the house, under the lights, we saw that her face was in bad shape. She had some cuts and scrapes, probably from falling on the road, and she said the man had hit her before she got out. We locked the door and stayed close to the front window, waiting for help to get there, while my partner stayed on the phone giving updates. He told them the red car was still parked out on the highway, but the man wasn't in sight. I tried to stay calm and comfort the woman when we suddenly heard a loud noise at the door. The man was outside shouting, saying he saw her run into our house. He also said the people inside couldn't keep her safe. I yelled back through the door, telling him to leave our property and that the police were already on the way. What he said next was completely unexpected. He shouted back that the police wouldn't make it in time. Then he started hitting and kicking the door, clearly trying to force his way in. The woman got even more upset and kept asking us to help her. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a large knife just in case. Our front door is very solid and strong, but the windows could be broken if someone really tried. My partner went to the bedroom and came back with his gun. Right at that moment, a police car pulled up into the yard, and two more came right behind it. The man saw them and took off running into the woods. Some of the officers stayed with us and helped the woman while the others began searching for the man. They found him about 2 hours later. It was definitely one of the more stressful nights we've had, but I'm glad the officers arrived when they did. If he had broken through a window, it might have ended much worse. My partner could have been forced to defend us, and no one wants that situation unless there's no other choice.